Well, good morning. Welcome to the City Planning Commission public meeting. And Madam Secretary, please begin.
Good morning. This is the City Planning Commission public meeting held at NYC City Planning Commission hearing room, Lower Concourse, 120 Broadway. Today is Wednesday, April 11, 2018. As a courtesy during the proceedings, we ask that you please turn off all cell phones and beepers. All speakers should fill out a speaker's card. In addition, we ask that those providing testimony please identify yourself, limit your remarks to 3 minutes, and speak clearly into the microphone. I will now call the roll. Chair Lago.
Here.
Vice Chairman Knuckles. Commissioner Bessa.
Here.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Here.
Commissioner Delausse.
Here.
Commissioner Dweck. Commissioner Edie.
Here.
Commissioner Efron.
Here.
Commissioner Knight.
Here.
Commissioner Levin.
Here.
Commissioner Marin.
Here.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
A quorum is present. The first item is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of Wednesday, March 28, 2018.
On the minutes, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved.
The next part of the calendar is the report section on page 1. Borough of the Bronx, calendar numbers 1 and 2. Calendar number 1, CD1, C1800888ZMX. Calendar number 2, N1800889ZRX. In the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning the Willow Avenue rezoning. For favorable reports on calendar numbers 1 and 2, Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delausse.
Yes.
No. Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin. Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Favorable reports have been adopted on calendar numbers 1 and 2. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 3, CD4, N180094ZAK, in the matter of an application for the grant of an authorization concerning 605 Hart Street Fresh for adoption on calendar number 3. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delausse.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar numbers 4 and 5 have been adopted. I'm sorry. That was calendar number 3. I'm missing a page. That was calendar number 3. I'm sorry, I'm missing a page. Calendar number 3 has been adopted. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar numbers 4 and 5. Calendar number 4, CD6, N180157ZAK. Calendar number 5, N180158ZAK. In the matter of applications for the grant of authorizations concerning 280 Richards Street waterfront for adoption on calendar numbers 4 and 5. Madam Chair.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Dweck. Commissioner Delausse.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar numbers 4 and 5 have been adopted. Borough of Staten Island, calendar number 6, CD3, N180197RCR, in the matter of an application for the grant of a certification concerning Tenafly Place and Hoda Place for adoption on calendar number 6. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delausse.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar number 6 has been adopted. Let us turn to the supplemental calendar. Borough of Staten Island, calendar numbers 1 and 2. Calendar number 1, CD3, N180160ZAR. Calendar number 2, N180161ZAR. In the matter of application for the grant of authorizations concerning Amboy Road, Blue Belt, for adoption on calendar numbers 1 and 2. Chair Lago.
Yes.
Commissioner Bessa.
Yes.
Commissioner Cerullo.
Yes.
Commissioner Delausse.
Yes.
Commissioner Edie.
Yes.
Commissioner Efron.
Yes.
Commissioner Knight.
Yes.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes.
Commissioner Marin.
Yes.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Yes.
Calendar numbers 1 and 2 of the supplemental calendar have been adopted. The next part of the calendar is the public hearing section on page 9. Borough of Brooklyn, calendar number 7 and 8. Calendar number 7, CD2, C180096, CMK. Calendar number 8, N180097, ZRK. A public hearing in the matter of applications for zoning map and zoning text amendments concerning 142 through 150 South Portland Avenue rezoning.
Madam Chair, if I may I have affirmative votes recorded for items, reports 1 through 6, as well as the 2 supplemental items on the calendar.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will start with a 10-minute presentation by the applicant team comprised of Peter Osamabor, Richard Lobel, Peter Beck, and Matthew Schomer.
Okay. Good morning, honorable commissioners. I bring you greetings from the, am I to start? Oh, okay. I bring you greetings from the 1,000 plus members of the Hanson Place Seventh-day Adventist Church. In October this year, 2018, we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary. We've been around for that long, and our principal aim or goal is to care for the spirit, the physical, and the mental well-being of individuals. We have a building that is now used. Okay. How does this work?
Oh, we got it. Got it?
Oh, okay. All right. The first one.
Yeah, first one.
Okay. We have a building that we currently use as what we call our community services. And what does that comprise? Because of what I said earlier, our goal is to cater for the spiritual, the physical, and the mental well-being of individuals. We believe that this building can do more than what we currently uses it for. And we talked about several things. We looked at selling the building. We could get at least $50 million for it. We looked at the concept of building a condominium and sell it at exorbitant price. We said all of this doesn't matter to us because we are not for money making. Our goal is to serve the needs of people, the spiritual, the physical, and the mental need of people. We decided to do affordable housing because by that we will have an impact on a greater number of people. And that impact, not only will it be temporarily, but will be till the kingdom come. Because if we're still there, people will need housing, and they need housing that they can afford. And to do it, we also need, it has to be economical. It has to make economic sense. And for it to make economic sense, we need to change the height or add more floors so that we can build something that we can maintain itself. That is why we are here. And we hope at the end of this presentation that you will support our goal of rezoning this lot. Okay. The space that we will use for the church will be used for several of the programs that we have. It will be used for our, it doesn't seem to move, okay. It will be used for our healthcare services. The basement of this building will hopefully get a tenant that will provide medical services. The other part will be used for music. We have a music program. Our church is big at music, because music is part of the spirit that the individual needs. We have organs, we have guitars, we have all sorts of instruments that people, young people, can come and learn how to use them. We have an education program we want to provide. For our seniors, we want them to be able to learn the new things, the new technology. How do you use your iPad? How do you use a computer? We want to provide that type of education to our seniors and the seniors in the community. We plan to do aftercare, meaning aftercare school program in the space if it's completed. So we have big plans, and for us to do this, we need to build an apartment up on top of our ground floor. And we are hoping that with the presentation you're going to hear from all these colleagues and the developers, you will agree with us that we need to upzone the lot we have now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners Richard Lobel, Sheldon Lobel. We're excited to be representing the church in this faith-based rezoning application. And we'd like to briefly go over the rezoning particulars and have this brief discussion with regard to affordability as well. And then obviously we're available to answer questions. So the rezoning boundaries themselves are, as per the map, Hanson Place to the north, South Portland to the east, South Elliott to the west, and then an approximate mid-block line to the south. And the existing zoning right now is an R7A. What should be noted, in addition to it being in an inclusionary housing designated area, is that although designated R7A and R72 on this block, the buildings on this block reflect much higher FARs and building heights. So we are immediately adjacent on the rear side of the property to a 12-story building. The Mokata building is on the northeast corner of the block, which, although 8 stories, is at a 6.61 FAR, far more reflective of the proposed R8A than the R7A. And on the southern portion of the block, there are 2 15-story residential buildings. So when we looked at the zoning of the property and we're discussing what zoning district to choose, this kind of informed our conversation. So the lot itself is a 12,000 square foot lot. Peter talked a little bit about the existing church programs, but as a faith-based organization, this is an organization which has numerous outreach programs, food pantries, music programs, and so there's a limitation with regards to what you can do on the existing lot with a building which is at an FAR of less than 1. So redevelopment really was critical for the church. Again, here's the development site with a 3-story, 9,400 square foot building. I'm going to skip through the pictures of existing conditions, which reflect some of the buildings in the area, including taller buildings in the area. And you can see from the pictures that some of them are quite dense and much taller than would typically be permitted in R7A, and go to the proposed actions. The actions include 4 actions. One would be to change the R7A to an R8A district with a C24 along Hanson Place. This was selected both based on the existing context of the area, as well as the fact that much of the development along Hanson Place is commercial, and it was seen to be as one of the goals of the Clinton Hill Fort Greene rezoning, as well as the downtown Brooklyn special district, to have both responsible development as well as a commercial corridor along Hanson. The second would be to extend the special downtown Brooklyn district, which I'll come back to. The third would be to impose a 95-foot height limitation, and then the fourth would be to establish this as mandatory inclusionary housing. And in the brief time that I have available before handing this over to one of our colleagues who will discuss the affordability, I would merely say that the special district extension was specifically to limit the height of this building as it was adjacent to the R7A buildings to the south of this rezoning area. area. So the idea here would be that despite the fact that an unlimited R8A would allow you to go to a height of 145 feet, it was deemed to be appropriate that adjacent to these townhomes to the south, we were going to essentially mirror an R7A. So the building actually sets back and is also smaller than would otherwise be permitted in an R8A. It goes down to 89 feet, and so it's the bulk adjacent to those townhomes is really appropriate for that block. So I would just briefly hand this over to Peter, who would just discuss the affordability with the limited time we have remaining. And the affordability charts are after the schematic designs, right there.
Good morning, I'm Peter Beck with Forsyth Street Advisors. I'll talk briefly about the affordability plan. The church's goals in this project had to be balanced with its desire for affordable housing, and that is that it needed to generate a minimum financial return from the project to support the church's charitable programs, and religious programs. And additionally, the project needs to generate enough financing proceeds to support the cost of building about a $4 million facility for the church on the land, which will be a separate condominium unit within the building.
I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up. The 10 minutes are up, but I suspect you'll be getting questions from commissioners. Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Peter. So go ahead, and if you mind, go ahead and finish your sentence, and then I have questions specifically about, the mix and match program and some thoughts about the affordability.
Sure. I mean, if you'd like, I could walk through what the affordability mix is for the project. So at the borough president's request, we included a tier of units at 40% of AMI. That's 10 units at 40% of AMI. Those would be targeted towards studios and one bedrooms. There was specifically a request from the borough president to make units affordable, make studios and one bedrooms affordable at that income tier in order to make units that could be used for seniors. We have another 15 units, or 15% of the project, at 60% of AMI, 30 units, or 30% of the project at 100% of AMI, and then the balance of the units, 44 units, or about 45% of the project, would be at 130. This is the M² program, or mixed middle income. It's a term sheet compliant mix. Actually, we're exceeding the term sheet in that we have more low-income units than would be normally required.
Okay, that's helpful. I mean, have you, as part of this process, looked at recent lotteries in the area? I know that Atlantic Yards, for instance, has had challenges filling their middle-income units.
We think that was an issue with the lottery process, we've done a lot of research on the market rents for apartments in the area. There's some market rent figures on the right-hand chart, on the right-hand side of that chart up there. We think that the 130% of AMI tier will be, at such a discount to market rate that, we think with proper marketing that there'll be very attractive apartments.
Have you also, so basically you're meeting the MIH option 1 with 25% of the units at an average of 60% of AMI and below, with 10% at 40.
Let me interrupt for 1 second, is that we're intending to do MIH option 2. We've looked at doing option 1. That was a request from the borough president. We don't think option 1 is financially feasible. What we're proposing to do is MIH option 2. That would be 30% of the project will be permanently affordable as MIH units. 10 of those 30 units will be the 40% of AMI units. And then the remainder will be at 60 and 100 for an overall weighted average of 65%.
Can you talk a little bit more about why it's not financially feasible? Is that more in the out years?
It has to do with the numbers of units that we would have to put in the 40% tier and the size of the units. It's would be another $1 million impact or something to the project to comply with the MIH option 1 rules, and it just it's just beyond what's financially feasible.
If I may, just one more point. I mean, I know that you guys are trying to balance a number of goals, and I know the church well and respect very much the work that the church does. I also know deeply the need in the community where it exists primarily, and the fact that it's really at the lower end. And that's, I think, a real part of the tension here. It'd be helpful to know if there's an openness to having a greater number of units at lower AMI levels.
Other questions from the commission? Commissioner Levin.
Well, I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit, Mr. Beck, on the lessons learned about marketing and what you think it's going to take to produce a marketing program here with a better result than was achieved at Atlantic Yards. I mean, this is not about the Atlantic Yards project, but what do we know about how to do it well?
And I think I'd have to defer questions on marketing to the developer, to MDG.
Okay.
I really can't speak to any particulars on the marketing process.
Okay,
So.
thank you.
Commissioner Efron.
I have two questions in very different areas. One is around the retained ownership by the church. It's a pretty ambitious and quite wonderful program that you've described. Will you retain ownership of the space on the ground floor or second floor, or will you become a tenant, or are you owner of the building with the developer not having equity? Or how can we assure that you'll stay in the community? That's one question. And the second question is whether there's anyone to speak about the design of the building and what the material is on the facade.
Sure. I can answer the first one. The developer is a fee-based developer.
Okay.
We own the building from day one till the end.
Great.
That is why we are able to say we can assure you that the rent will be stabilized and will be fixed throughout a very long period of time.
Thank you.
Stephanie, I will invite Stephanie to talk about the building design.
If she is listed to speak later, I'm happy to defer my question.
Yeah, she is.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant team? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi. One of the issues that was raised was the inclusion of the Salvation Army lot in the rezoning, and the concern about the development at that site, including the commercial overlay. Could you speak to the rationale for that decision?
Starting with the Salvation Army, obviously when the applicant comes in, we present the project with regards to our development site, and in the conversation with city planning was determined that it was appropriate to include these additional 7 sites. So the rezoning itself is the Salvation Army site, the Mokata site, our site, and these vacant lots along Hanson Place. The Salvation Army, was included, and I think the existing building there is a 12-story building. The building was, there was recent redevelopment activity on the site in 2013. And so there's excess floor area under the existing R7A zoning. The determination was that given the fact that they had this existing FAR potential and didn't redevelop, that including them was appropriate. It was unlikely that they would redevelop in the short term, given the fact that they had recently redeveloped. They have this additional FAR. But I think the other discussion with city planning was that it would be appropriate to include them as a nonprofit that does good work and would benefit potentially from additional square footage. So I'd say that obviously there's push and pull with regards to zoning district boundaries, what we include, what we don't include, but it was a thorough conversation with the department, and it was seen by the department as being appropriate, and we're happy to include it at their discretion.
Just for clarification, so the potential benefit might also be the sale of their rights, their additional FAR rights?
I don't necessarily know whether, they as a...
Is that possible?
Sure, they would be able, in compliance with the zoning resolution, to merge with an adjacent lot and provide development potential to adjacent sites, but that's a little too attenuated for our analysis.
I understand. And the parking lot is immediately adjacent?
The vacant lots along Hanson Place, again, have remained undeveloped for years under the R7A zoning. And when you look along Hanson Place, particularly across Caddy Corner and across the street, there are 14 and 15-story buildings of both commercial office and residential types. And so much of the discussion around the Hanson Place development was with regards to the C24 overlay, which was placed there. And I think that, again, this is something that was addressed with the department. There's no great benefit to the applicant of including a C24 in that it's not our site. It allows for commercial along Hanson Place. But again, this was a discussion we're happy to include it, given the fact that there is already some commercial context along Hanson Place. So this was added to the rezoning, really.
Thank you.
Sure.
When this comes back to review session, the department will be able to explain its land use rationale, not the sale of air rights. Mr. Levin.
Mr. Lavelle, since this is your shot at speaking with us, I'd like to ask you about the thrust of the community board's objection here.
Right.
And I have a feeling that we'll soon hear from members of the community, but we won't be able to get you to come back and respond. But their letter indicates that the principal objection here is to the 130-foot height of the proposed mixed-use building, 45% taller than what's permissible under the current zoning. And they feel it would undo some of the hard-won protections that were achieved during the Fort Greene and Clinton Hill rezoning. How do you respond to that? There is tension in this site because of its adjacency to both high-density downtown Brooklyn scale development and the lower-scale townhouse condition of Fort Greene.
Sure.
How do you persuade the community that this is nonetheless important and that it's not backtracking on, we all know how hard it is for a community to achieve a rezoning. How do we know we're not giving up ground here?
Sure. So first of all, I would just start out by saying that despite the fact that I can't come back before the commission at this session, we're going to be happy to respond to a number of issues in writing. There was a very thorough conversation at the community board, and we did receive a vote of the land use committee, 6 in favor, 4 opposed. We're happy to get that, and that rezoning approval was limited to our site. And so we went forward with our full board meeting, and there was a vote to adopt that. That was rejected, and then there was an eventual vote to reject the application. The community board resolutions themselves are a rejection of the proposal and its 4 components, being the rezoning, the extension of the district boundary of the special district boundary, as well as the inclusionary housing. And so there's the rejection itself, and then there's a 2-page explanatory letter from the chair. And so there's a range of issues upon which the discussion was based and upon which the rejection was based. But you really have to look at all of them. And the first one was the height of the building. And so, Peter eloquently discussed the fact that, this church has been in this area for 60 years. This is a faith-based organization which does many good works in the area. And so this was not something that was done in bad faith or without a tremendous amount of consideration. Obviously, the landmarked church property is across the street, and this is there's a robust membership, but throughout the conversations, and we did have multiple conversations with community members prior to the land use hearing. This was always a discussion about what the church wanted to do in their vision for what they could do on the site. The church as it exists is building a building which is 13 stories. We looked at the surrounding context. We looked at the 12-story character of the Salvation Army building immediately to the rear. We looked at the Mokata building, built at a 6.61 adjacent to the property, again at an R88 bulk, and we looked at the 2 15-story buildings on this block. And the other thing we looked at was the fact that there were these 5 townhouses adjacent to the property to the south. That discussion directly resulted in the adoption of the text amendment, or the proposed adoption, to allow for a building which for 30 feet is going to be an R7A building. So for the 30 feet adjacent to the townhomes, it will be seamless in that regard and will appear as if it's an R7A building. In addition, what we looked at was the fact that the residential townhouses, they're not protected. This is not a historic district on that block. And so those buildings can file applications to redevelop tomorrow. And indeed, if you look at the building history of those buildings, there is at least one new building application, which is at one point was filed for a 6-story building. So it's we look at the current development, the proposed development, but yeah, it was it's a challenge. It was a robust conversation around the bulk, but some of the other discussion was around things which chipped away at the land use approval, which was the fact that we wanted to extend the special downtown Brooklyn district, which again it's merely a tool to limit the height. And so there's a large conversation. I expect people would be speaking about it today, or will be, about how it's inappropriate to do that. That was merely a tool to limit the height. If anything, it benefits the surrounding area. And there was discussion about a restrictive declaration. The church really, that wasn't their call. It was basically, how are we going to be able to limit it? And that was seen as an appropriate method to limit it. And the other conversation was around affordability. And there were robust conversations at the community board hearing about the levels of affordability, whether this was appropriate. Peter and others can talk to the fact that the application changed over time to increase the affordability. It's a 100% affordable building. And although it's option 2, the real income level is more, I believe it's under 70% on average. So we came down on that. And so I think if you look at the totality of the community board and what they're asking for, we tried to address as much as we can.
Other questions for the applicant team? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. Chair.
We now are going to continue, and we will rotate between speakers in favor and speakers in opposition. We will first have 5 speakers in favor, then 5 speakers in opposition. And again, each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. And it will begin with Milton Haynes.
Madam Chairperson and honorable commissioners, I welcome this opportunity to support as strongly as I can this application by the Hanson Place Seventh-day Adventist Church. As a young immigrant and college student in 1962, I began to worship at the Park Place Church with a group of members who knew nothing about me, but knew my parents and other relatives. I was immediately welcomed and embraced, and for the past 56 years, what is now the Hanson Place Church has been my spiritual home. And I welcome this opportunity to add my voice in strong support for this community project. From the inception of this church 60 years ago, it has been committed to community outreach, helping the poor and handicapped, and extending a helping hand to all in need. It was the first church in the Fort Greene area to open the doors to the homeless and provide them with a place to sleep at night. It was one of the first churches in the Fort Greene community to set up a soup kitchen and distribute food to the homeless and the hungry. The church also operates a school to provide quality education to young boys and girls who will be our leaders tomorrow. The great history of this church is captured in a book, Singing in a Strange Land, written by the noted historian Dr. Glenn Phillips, professor of history at Morgan State University. This building project not only provides affordable housing, but will provide access to quality health care to the Fort Greene community. I'm a physician. I've been practicing for about 50 years. My main office is in Manhattan, but for about 10 years, I had an office on Eastern Parkway right here in Brooklyn. As a physician, I've spent the last 20 years actively engage at both the state and national level in addressing issues of healthcare disparities and its negative impact on minority communities. I welcome and am ecstatic that included in the proposed building is a medical clinic. This will be a great asset to the Fort Greene community. I've already had some preliminary discussions with the leadership of our Health Ministries department about some of the health projects that can be expanded or established that can have a profound impact on improving the health status of the residents of this community and even beyond. And as you may know, as part of the history of the Adventist Church, the health ministry is very critical and very important.
I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up, Dr. Haynes. We have a very large number of speakers, and so we limit folks to 3 moments.
Thank you very much. It's my hope that you would vote favorably on this project. Thank you for your attention.
Questions for Dr. Haynes? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Oswald Lewis.
I decline it.
Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Steve Bodden.
Good morning to all. I'm Steve Bodden. I'm really speaking on behalf of, as a friend and a supporter of SDA, Salvation, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and their efforts, their work. I have participated with their pantry program, and I know that they do some incredible work. But also as a member of the body of the Christian Church, I'm on the board of trustees of the Presbytery of Long Island. So, and in that capacity, as the church, as it looks to do good, and we know that in this area, in the area of actually entire New York City, the need is great. The need is great for affordable housing, and therefore the SDA with this project looks to serve and take care of that need. And it makes a lot of sense that contextually this makes logical. And if I could borrow the words of the great Commander Spock, and he said, logic would dictate then that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So thank you.
I think this may be the first time that Spock has been quoted in a Planning Commission public hearing. Questions for Mr. Bodden? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Clyde Semper.
Good morning to everyone. Our Commissioner. I'm Clyde Semper, as was told. I'm the Director of Community Services at the Hanson Place Church at present. And I'm a member of the church. Fortunately for me, I lived in Fort Greene for over 20 years. So although I'm no longer in Brooklyn, I still attend Hanson Place Church. We have a lot of programs that we do at Community Services, and I can just name a few. And what's stated about our soup kitchen pantry, our giveaway of food, our toys, our seniors program, our clothing program, our furniture, and disaster response, all of that we do there. But we have special things that we want to get done. And I know that since we are going to have a building that you would observe might not have had our name involved, yet I am holding my church responsible to make sure that we maintain all of this, which at present they are. We are at present serving thousands of people on a weekly basis, about 500 in our pantry, and also in our soup kitchen, about 150 on a weekly basis. We intend to keep Fort Greene healthy, and we try by God's grace and the hard work of about 20 or 30 volunteers to make sure that especially Fort Greene does not get neglected 10 years ago, we started a program with the farmers market, whereby we can provide fresh vegetables and also teach people how to cook them. Because it's as known, most people can't cook. But we are working hard at making sure that we keep our neighborhood very healthy. We are glad that we can respond to other programs, because we have this program that we use, which is called Emergency Response, which we worked with on Sandy, and also we went to Texas to help in that situation. And as far as I see and as far as I know, we want to keep these programs running, if we are in the building or not. But we support the building because we are looking at doing something a little different. We want to at least make housing available to other folk. And because of this, as Director of Community Services at this present time, I want to say I would love you to vote in favor of getting this building done so that we can continue moving forward in our spiritual and physical projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Semper. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Mr. Semper, thank you for being here and for the work that you do on behalf of the community. The question I have is how will the new space, the physical aspects of the new space, support the community services programs that are currently underway and future ones that are anticipated?
The new space, you said?
Like how much bigger is it going to be? You know, those kinds of things. Like how has the space been designed to help support the community service programs that you just talked about?
In the new building, I don't know. I can't answer that question. I know that provision is being made at the present time, once we get out of that building, that we can still function in 4th Green, right next to the church. That I know of. But in the building, I can't.
You mean on a temporary basis?
It is temporary, yes.
Okay.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Semper.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Rhoda Fleetwood.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the building for the Hanson Place Seventh-day Adventist Church. I happen to be a volunteer in the community services, and on Thursdays especially, I go there as often as I can to help to distribute the food to the people. The space that we now have is not adequate in my view, and it is not extremely convenient for the type of service we would like to give. So I hope that you will vote in favor of the new building so that we can do what we have been doing, much more of it, and better service to the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fleetwood. Questions? Okay, we will now turn to speakers in opposition, beginning with Sandy Rayburn.
Good morning. My name is Sandy Rayburn, and I've lived in Fort Greene for 28 years. Thank you, Chair Lago, and your fellow commissioners for allowing me this opportunity. And I speak on behalf of Preserve, our nonprofit organization, Preserve Our Downtown Brooklyn Neighborhoods. More than 1,000 of us who have signed against this project. In 2007, hundreds of residents, along with then City Council member Tish James, fought for and won protections for our low-rise historic community. The City Council unanimously voted for it, and yes, your own City Planning Commission ratified the borders for 99 blocks of Fort Greene and Clinton Hills contextual rezoning. It passed, but now it's in harm's way. If altered by this ULURP application, it will be a broken promise to our communities that expect better from our city government and its agencies. Our protective border and boundary are now under attack. We're already a besieged neighborhood. The downtown Brooklyn mega towers are encroaching on our low-rise blocks. We're a neighborhood whose charm, character, and context were established when we proved to this very commission in 2007 that Fort Greene had earned the right to preserve its quality of life and freedom from out-of-scale development on our historic blocks. Construction and new developments within blocks of this application for 142, 150 South Portland Avenue and Hanson Place have run amok. A global appraisal by this commission as you evaluate yet another project is urgent. Please, please look at the wider picture. The rezoning compact of 2007 clearly contains inclusionary housing for this location. The Fort Greene community encourages and supports the effort to build the affordable housing already on the books, per the agreement now in place. An affordable housing project can be built as of right. Why should the residents on these blocks be made subservient to the greed of a developer? As City Council Member Tisch said to her fellow councilpersons when the contextual rezoning was made into law on that July 25th day in 2007, and I quote verbatim, Tisch speaking, "Today is a great day. We are downsizing Fort Greene and Clinton Hill, one of the hottest real estate markets in the city of New York. Fort Greene has been in the sights of developers who do not care about the character of historic neighborhoods, developers who are not shy about constructing towers that are out of scale with surrounding structures. We are not against development in the borough of Brooklyn. We are against out-of-scale buildings in historic row house blocks." The Land Use Council vote on that day, 48 in the affirmative, 0 negative. How will you vote today? Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Rayburn?
Oh, sorry. I thought you would have heard enough from me.
Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. Has your group analyzed what the number of unit differential might be between the voluntary inclusionary program and this rezoning?
Well, we know that we're talking about 8 stories as opposed to 13 stories. And indeed, there is a program already in the books, which we would like and hope that the Seventh-day Adventist Church would take advantage of to promote the affordable housing that we think is so important. It's called SARA, S-A-R-A, and this is de Blasio's effort, of course, to try to implement the senior housing that we are in such dire need of. The city's program for constructing new senior units is the Senior Affordable Rental Program, SARA, which serves seniors making up to 60% of the area median income, the AMI, or $40,000 for a single program. There is tons of money to be able to support this as of right 8 stories to be able to afford truly affordable housing for seniors, among others. So that's as specific as I can get.
Other questions for Ms. Rayburn? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Joseph Napoli.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Napoli, and I live on South Elliott Place between Fulton and Hanson. I live near Hanson Place. I've lived there since 1971, and I worked on landmarks for both Fort Greene and Bam Triangle. I worked on the original committees on the landmarks. Fast forward to 2007, when we got contextual zoning in Fort Greene, I sort of breathed a sigh of relief and thought we were protected from out-of-scale development like this project. After this time, around this time, I think I started noticing so many towers being built, first in New York, and then they had spilled over to Brooklyn. And I noticed that they didn't seem to be very great. They didn't please my eye, and I like to look at architecture. And they also didn't seem to be filled. It just seems like they're building, 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 building. And with the building comes overcrowding. Just overcrowding. Now we seem to have a development and a developer that they're not content with building in downtown. They want to chisel off some of the protected areas of Fort Greene. We got that in 2007. In this case, a 13-story tower next to a 4-story group of row houses, it just is out of scale. And if this isn't bad enough, no thought has been given to how this building will impact the quality of life in the neighborhood. We have been overrun with rats. We have no end to problems when there is any sort of construction. The building, I don't even know about creating shadow, but I understand that that's, like a big issue. And, well, just try every day to deal with the subway. Just try to deal with that in downtown Brooklyn. And that subway station is going to be the Atlantic Terminal subway station. There's not too many others around there. Maybe one on the one on Fulton Street, the G train or A and C. The towers have already gotten way out of control on Flatbush Avenue, and now they seem to be coming into Fort Greene, edging us right in, or just closing us right in. The block in question is part of Fort Greene and should not be chiseled away to make a special downtown Brooklyn district. This is encroachment, plain and simple. This is greed. Tower developers, we don't want out-of-scale development near our historic row house blocks in Fort Greene. No expansion of the special Brooklyn special downtown Brooklyn district into Fort Greene, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Napoli. Questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Mr. Napoli, thanks for being here, and thanks for testifying. I think the point on the encroachment is understood. I'm just wondering, as your prior speaker also said it, could you unpack a little bit what you mean by greed, considering the project would be 100% affordable and supporting charitable work?
What I'm saying is just basically, there just seems to be this mania for building the biggest, the most out-of-scale thing that you can possibly do. I mean, particularly 80 Flatbush. It just seems to be enormous, and that's what I think it is. That's what I mean with the greed. It's just nothing in scale. Doesn't matter who you step on. Just step on the little people. That's for sure. But that's the way I see it.
Thank you. Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Napoli. Our next speaker in opposition is Esther Blount.
Hi, my name is Esther Blunt. I live in Fort Greene. I'm sorry. I just think that this project will destroy the character of the neighborhood. I get so upset when they keep saying it's 100% affordable. It's 30% affordable. You just gave the presentation and said 30% of the units will be either at 30% or 40% of the AMI. When you start talking 100%, 130% AMI, that's not affordable, that's market rate. As many of you know, the New York Times wrote an article on 3/16/18 about as Brooklyn Towers saw a seeking feeling for developers. A lot of the market rate units are left vacant. I don't know what's going to happen to the project when they don't get the rent that they expecting. But before that, the New York Times had an article on 8/29/16 predicting again that the market is saturated in Brooklyn. The rental boom may turn into a glut. So Community Board 2 is saturated with new development. And believe me, we all know we need affordable housing. But these units are not, they should be 100% affordable. Really 100% affordable with 30% AMI all across the board. That's what a church should do. And it's about money, and a lot of the churches in our neighborhood now are losing congregations because of gentrification, and they selling off prime real estate, and it's a slippery slope. So we want to keep our brownstone neighborhood. We want to keep stuff built as of right, and we fought for this in 2007, and we want to keep it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Blunt. Questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Ms. Blunt, I appreciate you being here. I'm wondering, and I share your thoughts about the depth of affordability. I'm wondering if the project were more deeply affordable for the AMI levels that are, where there's the greatest gap, would you be more supportive of a rezoning that would help accommodate that? Unfortunately, oftentimes you need greater density to reach greater levels of affordability.
No, I'm against the rezoning because it leads to other floodgates. Another developer will come in that area and build something that's just, again, 100% not affordable.
Thank you. Commissioner Efron.
I just want to thank you for your thoughtful testimony.
Ms. Blunt,
Sorry, thank you.
You're being called back.
I want to thank you for your thoughtful testimony, and I guess I have the inverse question, which is, are you supportive of them building to the 8 stories under the zoning?
Well, we couldn't stop that, could we, as of right?
Thank you. Our next speaker in opposition is Jack Lester.
Good morning, members of the commission. My name is Jack Lester. I represent Preserve Our Brooklyn Neighborhoods. And the reason for that title, the reason for that name for the community organization is that this rezoning runs directly contrary to the legislative purpose and intent of the 2007 rezoning. The purpose of that rezoning was to uphold, preserve, protect the low-rise, row house neighborhood character of the community, and most importantly, to present future out-of-scale development. At the same time, the rezoning provided incentives for affordable housing. So the rationale that they need this rezoning, this upzoning, to provide affordable housing, I think is contradicted by the current legislative purpose of the current zoning. So I think all of the speakers have brought this out. They felt, the homeowners, the community felt that that rezoning in 2007 was going to protect them, was going to be a buffer from the encroachment of the commercial downtown district. Brooklyn is gentrifying. Brooklyn is exploding in that area. So in 2007, the community got together, the civic organizations, the local elected officials, the community board, they put together a coalition and they formed that rezoning. This directly contradicts that. So I urge the commissioner to vote it down. Affordable housing is already provided for in the current rezoning, and the community should be protected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lester. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Mr. Lester, we've been told that, I mean, the proponents of this rezoning have argued that this block is somewhat unique in the context of the 99 blocks of the 2007 rezoning. This is not one of your classic all 100% townhouse blocks, and that it has buildings on the north and the south end of the block that are at a scale that's more consistent with the R8A that is being sought here. How do you address that? I mean, I'm certainly sympathetic to the efforts that a community goes through to get a contextual rezoning, but this one does seem to be a unique block that is not exactly, doesn't exactly fit the context that you just described.
I think that's a good question, and we have a photographic array here today. One of our community members has actually brought to the commission photographs which will show the context of this neighborhood, of this block. And I think the fact that this block has been threatened and this block is vulnerable makes it all the more reason why it needs the protection. In other words, to say because it's been infringed upon previously, we could infringe upon it more, again, would run contrary to the 7A zoning, which was there to protect this particular block more than others, perhaps, because it's already vulnerable.
Okay, the fact
so
that
I think that
the fact that the infringement in this case is proposed to serve the social purposes of the church and affordable and 100% affordable housing, does that make it any better for you?
Well, I think it was a good question before, and I don't think the applicant has made a presentation demonstrating the number of additional housing that would be created under this rezoning that couldn't already have been created under 7A, which provides an incentive for inclusionary housing. So that was already built in to the rezoning. So to come back and say, well, we need to go higher to do inclusionary housing, when you already have that incentive, when it's already balanced to protect the community, again, runs contrary exactly to the legislative purpose of the 7A, which is protect the community, we give you an incentive for inclusionary housing. So now we say we want more height, but there's been no showing, and I think the applicant has that burden, to show us how many additional affordable housing units you will create at this juncture.
Other questions for Mr. Lester? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in opposition is Ernest Augustus.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Ernest Augustus, and I live at 398 Adelphi Street. That's between Green Avenue and Fulton Street. In regards to Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, I must say that I may be the oldest resident in that community since I was born there. I attended church there, and I still reside there. I'm also on the community board. I'm on the land use committee. I had been previously the second vice chair of the board. I listened to and also, before I begin, I attempted, and I'm sorry that I failed. I was trying to download on my stick, and I couldn't do it. I just ran out of time. But I do have photos. And I would like to ask a native Brooklynite who was raised in Brownstone, Brooklyn. Let me lay out the characteristic. My parents have a house on Hart Street, and on every block that I knew of when I was growing up, and it's still there, you may have a large 8-story multiple dwelling building at the corner of a brownstone block, and the rest of the block is built out with townhouses. So South Portland, Hanson Place is not unique. It is similar in character. I do take exception to the developer and the church trying to refine the character of South Portland Street. It is not characteristic of the high-rise. And nobody walks down the street looking down at high-rise building. Let me pass this around. This is.
You could submit it to the secretary when you're done, and then it will be distributed to the commissioners.
But one of the underlying reasons for the contextual rezoning, and I'll quote from the summary, and this is key to me, as market demand for housing within Fort Greene, Clinton Hill has increased, a number of out-of-scale 11 to 13-story townhouse development are proposed or have been constructed that are inconsistent with the low-rise row house neighborhood character. That portend what was going to happen. The market has been released in downtown Brooklyn. When we did the downtown Brooklyn upzoning, ostensibly for office space, it has actually facilitated and pumped, actually prime the luxury housing market. You will never get affordable housing downtown Brooklyn because it does not support that. There are so many items that are coming online, that are in the pipeline, that put added pressure on this low-rise neighborhood.
I'm afraid we'll have to stop and turn it over to the commission for questions. Commissioner Ortiz.
Can I cede my time to Mr. Augustus? Hi.
No, I'm afraid that's not possible.
Hi, good morning, thank you. I have a few questions. You noted that you were a member of the CB2 Land Use Committee, and of course we know that they voted 6 in favor, 4 opposed, 1 abstention on the condition that the rezoning be limited to the applicant's property. Could you speak to sort of that decision making process and perhaps where your committee members stood on approving that?
It was somewhat convoluted. It was a long discussion. It was confusing at best, particularly the proposed expansion of the special downtown Brooklyn district. That's through me off. We didn't have the rationale. They didn't have the explanation because it was embedded in the applicant's ULIP application, which I found unusual. Maybe I'm somewhat naive. We would have expected the Brooklyn City Planning Office to come and appraise us or inform us before this proposal was inserted into the applicant's application. But I must say I was stunned by the Brooklyn downtown to pull that district up to South Portland. I was confused because I didn't know how it was going to impact other blocks. You just don't pull a zoning district up to a site. It does affect the adjacent blocks. But I needed explanation. In fact, I even called Brooklyn City Planning to get an appointment to talk to the planner for clarification. I needed that. Unfortunately, he was a little defensive and he backed off. But that was a key sticking point for us. So the board, the land use committee, had a very difficult decision to make. But that was a recommendation to the full board.
But ultimately, they voted in favor.
The full board voted down.
No, I understand that, but ultimately, the land use committee
The land use committee, it was contested. I mean, it's not, as an advisory group, it was a very contested meeting. That's what I can say about it.
Okay, and the other issue about scale, I'm curious, this, I am familiar with this block, and, there are, the context, I think, is notable. There's beautiful buildings. Under an as-of-right scenario, you can build up to 8 stories. The proposal here is 13. So what would those additional 5 stories, change about what you experience as you walk down the street necessarily?
It's not what we experience, it's what it portends. I'm saying that we are, wolves are at the door. And unfortunately, we look at a site, and we are site-specific in our discussion, but if you are able to draw back the contents and look down one block, you'll see another high-rise luxury development coming up that's being proposed. We're not far from 80 Flatbush, and there's a height issue regarding the special downtown Brooklyn district. We keep amending those districts. We keep asking for more, and it's incremental. Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, I grew up there, and I grew up there when it was a undesirable neighborhood, when there was a lot of disinvestment, redlining. But people made investments. They didn't play the city. They made between total gut renovations. I'm still paying the bill for my renovation, but it was a total gut, and total renovation goes from either $800,000 to $3 million. I mean, it's a sizable investment, and there is a demand, believe it or not, a market demand for townhouses. That's why the price is limited supply, and there's a whole demand. But also there are available sites, and I'll leave it with the secretary. You'll see an example where you had one of the reasons that we converted from the R6 because you could build up to 14 stories. The contextual zoning were able to now incentivize people who have these sites, instead of knocking them down, or not really having them, now they have an incentive. And there are several brownstones that are being built right now because it's easier to build these townhouses because that's the market.
Thank you very much.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Augustus. We will now turn to speakers in support, beginning with Pearline Higgins.
My name is Pearline Higgins, and I feel very privileged to talk to this august in front of this august assembly here of dignitaries of the City of New York. I hear in favor of this project. The word greed has been tossed around quite a bit earlier, but I want this assembly to know that that church was started with some immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago and Jamaica, Alumni Association of the Northern Caribbean University and the University of the Southern Caribbean. When we came here, we came with the idea that we own the responsibility to positively impact any place we go. And so we sold our house, we mortgaged our houses, we took second mortgages and home equity loans. We do not carry a mortgage on that property. It was done by private people. So we were not greedy, really, as it might be perceived. We want to serve the community. We want to make a positive impact on the community. I love Brownstone personally. I love it, and I think it's a wonderful characteristic of this neighborhood that we are talking about. But there are lots of people on the streets, sleeping on the sidewalk and over the gratings with no place to live. They can't afford a place to live. Our aim as a church is to serve the community, to make a positive impact in the community, to let the people who are on the sidewalk get off, because the income does not match up with the cost of living in the area, and many people are struggling. Young people are struggling even to just find a place to live. And as a church, that's our burden. That's our decision to do whatever it takes, whatever we can do to make affordable housing a reality to the people who are living with $8.50 an hour, $10 an hour work, and can't afford to feed themselves, to pay their phone bill, and to live, have a place to sleep. My determination is to do whatever I can, personally, on my little Social Security and my little pension, to support the project that is proposed here. For hopefully we can achieve the goal of positively impacting the lives of people around us.
Thank you, Ms. Higgins.
Thank you very much for hearing me. Please vote in a positive way.
Questions for Ms. Higgins? Thank you. Our next speaker is Margaret Babb.
Good morning, Commissioner, Madam Chair, and Commissioners. My name is Margaret Babb. On June 30th, 2017, the company I worked with for 21 years relocated to another state, and I was not able to move with them. It was not practical for me to do that. On March 2008, I relocated from Queens to Fort Greene, Brooklyn. I have been unemployed for the last 10 months. And the reason I'm able to pay my rent is because I currently live in an affordable apartment. I am not at the mercy of my friends and family. I am not another statistic that I have to go and seek a living in the shelter. Again, because I currently live in an affordable apartment. I am the face and name of a single woman who depends on affordable housing to live with dignity and to live comfortably in Fort Greene. I ask of you to consider this project 142 to 150 South Portland Avenue project. We need every affordable apartment so that people like me can live in Fort Greene and continue living in Fort Greene. So I ask of you to vote in favor of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Babb. Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, good morning.
Yes.
You know, there's some discussion about whether, you know, this site is truly affordable, right? That you know, 100% affordability is not really a reflection of perhaps the kind of affordability we want at the deeper levels. Do you have an opinion about that? I mean, as someone who's in affordable housing and perhaps at, you know, a different level?
I looked at the chart that was presented earlier, and I was able to look at it even prior to coming here. And if you look at some of the apartments even for me as a 2-bedroom apartment, I am still able to afford that apartment, even as I'm currently unemployed. I know I probably can't because I can't show income, but I'm saying if I had an income, I would have been able to afford that. So there are some apartments that I can afford as a single woman.
Mm-hmm. So at the 80, 100, 130% affordability, you consider those affordable as well?
Well, as I said, I am able to see where I can fit in some of the places, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Babb.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Stefan Paul.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Paul. I'm with the Architect's Office, OCV Architects, and I was here today to answer any questions regarding the design.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. If you could just explain what the colored materials are on the front of the facade of the
Right,
building.
so we have 4 different colors on the facade of the building. One of the materials is terracotta and the other is ephes, so the lighter colors go towards the higher portions of the building to reduce the visual bulk of the building.
And I could see on the front facade, there are 2 angles shown, the north and the south. I think it's the north or south, maybe it's east and west, but the 2 sides flanking the building, the windows go a portion of the way. What does the back of the building look like?
So the back of the building, it has the double windows that you see on the front, is those same windows are on the back, and it has the white ephes that you see at the top of the building is also on the back side of the building.
Okay. And was there any rationale for why you chose to have color?
Right, so we chose the colors to reflect the materials in the neighborhood. Our main focus was on the church across the street, so we pulled the colors, the red brick from the church across the street, and we also wanted to reflect some of the brownstone colors in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Deleuze.
Hi, Ms. Paul. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of interior community spaces or exterior spaces there are for residents, or perhaps the larger community?
Of course. So on the first floor, we do have spaces for the church, which include practice spaces and a multi-purpose room that the church can use for their various programs. And then on the second floor, there's a rear terrace that the residents can use, for any events or just for lounging purposes, but it is open to the residents of the building.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
I may be continuing on that. Could you tell us a little bit about how the design for this building evolved? What kind of consultations were there with various stakeholders in the building, the church, the developer, the local community? How did you figure out what was appropriate and how it should be laid out?
Right, so we started mainly with understanding that we wanted to keep the south portion of the building lower than the rest of the building, so we allowed the bulk to raise towards the right-hand side of the building or the north side of the building. And we also talked with city planning and with the Brooklyn Council to figure out which bulk would be best, what colors would be best. So there were a lot of discussions and there were a lot of changes throughout the process to make the building as best as it could be with the considerations that we had to deal with the zoning.
How about consultations with the church?
We also, of course, we spoke with the church first to see what kind of programming they needed, and they did consult with us on that.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Paul.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Michael Rooney.
Hi, I'm Michael Rooney from MDG Design and Construction. We're the fee developer for the church. To go quickly, because the time is short. First, the SARA program we did look at, and the numbers did not pencil out. We were short well over $1 million with that financing. Number two, the church isn't greedy. They hired me specifically as an affordable housing developer to build this building for them because they know I'd be committed to affordable housing. We originally came up with what they could build as of right. That was our goal originally. It was between 50 and 60 units. And when we ran the underwriting, it was impossible to build the church facility without going to market on 100% of the units. So they could still build the building at market, and they can go forward, but it would be 100% market rate project. Number three, they did look very carefully. They've known the brownstone owners on the block for a long time. I believe they may have even sold one of the buildings that the brownstone owners have, and they purposely built the building, the part of the building directly next to the brownstones, to the exact height that's as of right. So it wouldn't be any worse for the brownstone owners than as if they built as of right, than having the additional height. So that was done purposely for their benefits to honor their neighbors. A question was asked about marketing. One, the reason why it doesn't work is because people know how to get around the lottery. There's a lot of rules in the city. I've been doing affordable housing for 30 years with the city. We've built over 700 buildings with HPD, over 18,000 units. And in my 30 years, 100% affordable. I've never done one market rate project. The way you do it, if you want to get around the lottery, you go get as little newspapers as possible. You do as little community outreach as possible. You're required to do some. There's a list, but you just do a weaker job of it. And what you do is on the rents, on the higher tiers that you want to sneak out of the project, what you do is you have a very small band between the market rent and the rent that you're proposing. So it's very easy to get around the trick. If somebody wants to do it, we don't do that. Have why the church hired us. Here in our particular project, on the higher end, which would be the only level, the 130%, that there would have been a concern. Our rents are between 50 and 75% of what the market rent is. So we're way below. The majority of these rents are, $1,800, $2,200, $2,700. We just did J Street Firehouse, and we did a lottery, and we had several hundred people for our 4 vacant 130% AMI units they rented immediately.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Rooney? Commissioner Eady.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. So you've been referred to as a fee developer of this project?
That's
and just
correct.
to be clear, does that mean that the church retains ownership of the property and basically you will develop it on their behalf, and then at the end of it, they'll continue to own it? Will you manage it afterwards, or do you completely walk?
We have a management arm, so we will, additionally, the church has hired us to manage the building long-term.
But they maintain ownership of the
They maintain ownership of the property.
You just continue to earn fees?
Yeah, the way it's technically set up, so for full disclosure, they'll own 90%, we own 10%, so we could guarantee the loan on behalf of our lender, which is Goldman Sachs, and they could buy us out at the end of 15 years for $1, and it's worked out that the 10% ownership, the fees that come out of it is my developer fee. So we deferred. We were supposed to get paid. If we did a market rate deal, I would have got paid at closing. They take full ownership. So here I'm getting paid my fee over 15 years as a concession to make sure we could keep this affordable.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Efron.
I did have a question. So the lawyer representing the team mentioned that it was a 30-foot at whatever the height would be under 7A. And that was justification for some concession to the scale of the neighborhood. We've seen a few deals where there was a gradual rise up. Was there, at 30 feet is really just 2 townhouses or a little bit less than 2 townhouse width. Was there any consideration for a more gradual sway, or was there some financing detriment?
It was a financing detriment. What happens is we have only so much FAR we can get, so in order to maximize that and to make the building affordable to build, we can't go above 12 stories in order to do plant construction, which keeps the construction prices in that 250 to 300 range. So what we have is steel, where we have the community facility, and then we have 12 stories above that that we could do plank. If we went any higher by stepping up, we'd have to go higher, but then we have to build a poured concrete building, which is going to add $50 a square foot.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, you mentioned market rents in the area, and that I guess I took away that even at 100 and 130% of AMI, these rents are, well, they would be permanently, tagged at that level, but that perhaps they are less than what we're seeing in some of the luxury units downtown. Could you speak to the comps?
Yeah, so on which level, 100%, 130%?
I mean, both. I mean, are both of those significantly less or moderately less than what we're seeing in the market?
Yeah, so the 100% AMI units, I'll just give you an example. For 1 bedroom, the market currently is averaging $2,782, and the high rent is $3,800. We're renting for $1,733. For a 2-bedroom, we're renting at $2,000. The average market rent is $3,780, and the high is $5,795. On the 130% AMI units, a 1-bedroom is $2,270. We're renting at the markets, again, I just gave it to you. And we have those comps, and we'll hand that in afterwards so you could see the exact addresses of each of the comps and how it was calculated.
And I think it's important to note, I mean, in this case, we're looking at 100 and 130% AMI that would be permanently affordable.
Yeah, so we have a mix on which of the units would be affordable. We have to mix it so we have a mandatory 30% with the mandatory inclusionary zoning. The HPD financing will dictate another 15%, so it'll be 45% permanently affordable. I'm not sure what HPD will have in the final agreement, but I'm guessing will be 30 to 40 years on the balance of the unit. So it's a long time, but on the permanently affordable, we have a mix, which we have to mix it across, and we mix it across the 40, 60, and 100. If the board and the city felt they want us to do it with the higher rent units, go permanently affordable, we were going to do none of them because we felt it was more important to the community to lock in the lowest rents. Obviously, that's a bigger benefit for the community to lock in the low ones than the higher ones. But we could mix it in any way that HPD and the boards
I was
would
just
want.
getting at the, that these rents would be, a number of them would be permanently affordable and the others would be affordable for the 40-year term, I think you're saying. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Vice Chair Knuckles.
I know you said earlier that you had run numbers pursuant to the as-of-right development scenario and that they didn't pencil out. But just tell me, what's the total number of units that as-of-right zoning would yield versus what is proposed here today?
It's between 50 and 60 units. I think with a nice mix, when we realized it would have to be market, it came out to 54, 55 units. And that was based on a mix of 1s, 2s, and a few 3s for the community.
Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Marin.
Michael, nice to see you.
Hey, good to
I have a question for you because you just brought up something that sort of was not presented earlier when they put up the chart for the AMIs. So you're mentioning that as a result of HPD's participation, there's an additional 15% affordable. But we're hearing that it's 70 and 30% affordable. Where do that extra 15, what does that fall into?
Well, it comes from the HPD finance.
No, I realize that, but I guess the question is, where is that reflective of the number of units being kept as affordable? Even though I know the 15% is not in perpetuity, I get that, but where do they fall into the numbers presented? Because I didn't see, if I recall, I only saw 30% affordable.
Because we only represent what's the mandatory inclusionary zoning, because HPD hasn't told us which ones they want to make permanently affordable. So they might say 130% units. They want to mix in some of the hundreds and 130%. Right now, we have a mix of 10 permanently affordable in the 40%.
Correct.
13 at the 60%, and 9 at the 100%. So HPD will have the option. They'll dictate what the additional 15% units, another 15 units, and which levels they would want to see them permanently affordable.
So it is possible that some of your 100 units will drop down? Is that what you're saying?
No, it would mean, because they're all considered affordable, because 130 is the line, so HP just gets to dictate which 40, 60, 100, or 130 should make up the additional 15.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Thanks for being here, and thanks for answering a number of questions that came up during the discussion. I guess I just want to go on record as saying that for the additional 15% affordable, that I agree with the development team's goals, that it would be more beneficial to the community to have them at the lower AMI levels.
Okay. Duly noted.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Rooney.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Lois Vaz Espinal.
Good morning. It's still morning. Madam Chairman-person and the City Commission. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Lois Vaz Aspinall. I've been a member of Hans Place for the past 49 years. And during this time, I've worked in Fort Greene area. To be specific, as a registered nurse, I train nurse technicians through the City Program Agency at Brooklyn Hospital and Downstate Medical Center. Changes, this is during the 90s. Changes must come when we have growth. So, our outreach programs are one of our priorities. Therefore, now retired, I was truly looking forward to being a productive volunteer at the yet-to-be-built Medical Plaza. For instance, may I be permitted to say that it will, all these years, the demographics in the area has been recently and rapidly changing, especially after the date of the baby boomers. Therefore, we must address, plan, and prepare to accommodate this fast-growing population, which is inevitable because we are living longer and healthier lives. For example, the Health and Temperance Director of the Hans Place Church, in collaboration with the pastor, doctors, nurses, psychologists, physical therapists, and other health professionals. And all these are members of the church. For implementing and accomplishing the lifestyle changes series for many years in Fort Greene, so that we seniors especially can experience quality of life. I'm proud and happy to say I was one of the recipients of this wellness and fitness classes that have been initiated. And I have benefited. I've lost 96 pounds in this, it's approximately 10 years, 4 years now. And I know it has made me so much more healthier that the doctor removed 3 of my medication. So, I am looking forward that this is such an important venture that we have. And what happened is that, oh boy.
I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up, Ms. Vaz-Espinal.
I'm sorry, but the whole thing is that we have to,
thank you.
We were asking for help.
Questions for Ms. Vaz-Espinal? Thank you. We will now turn to speakers in opposition, beginning with Carolyn Hubbard, Commonwealth.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Carolyn Hubbard Kamunanwiri. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk to you about my neighborhood, my home. My family has been in the Fort Greene area and on South Portland Avenue since the 1940s, so we're not newcomers. We got our property under much struggle. It wasn't even a matter of redlining. We had a lot of trouble to get our property, and we want to keep it. And we want to keep it flourishing. We want to keep our neighborhood flourishing. I'm here with the Preserve Our Brooklyn Neighborhoods because we see this encroachment and changing of our zoning as just another step to call us the part of downtown Brooklyn and have more large buildings. What they didn't tell you about the 12-story buildings on the other end of the block is that is the result of having lived through eminent domain by the city, taking our properties, claiming that we were going to have Baruch College come to Brooklyn. I don't know if you remember that fight years ago. We were part of that. And after they took all of our properties, many of the homeowners who look like me lost their homes at that time. Then they changed the project, and the best we could get, rather than having all commercial down at that end of the block, was to get the housing, the 221D3 program that HUD had at the time. So now we're faced with another subterfuge of showing us, yes, the church does good works and they want to continue and build on that. But this proposal before you is not just for this property on South Portland Avenue, it's for the whole block. And it means the other properties would also be taken. And that includes lots on Hanson Place and Fort Greene Place. It was just last year that the Salvation Army tore down a 2-story building on South Elliott, which would be included in this proposal, should you vote on it. And the property on Hanson Place had 4-story brownstones. That's being torn down. The current building that the church has there is only 4 stories, like our houses. So this will be going to the back of the lot line. We will have so much more in bulk because they're going to build right to the lot line, 100 feet back. Our backyards stop at 35, 36, so that we have an extensive backyard. That won't be anymore. So the bulk is what is very disturbing. My particular home is right next to the project. I have a party wall with what will be destroyed. So I'm very concerned. My family is very concerned. My neighbors to the right of me are concerned. We feel that we're under siege. We want housing that's affordable. We have voted for housing that was affordable previously, but this has to be done within the bounds of what makes sense for the neighborhood. And a church, which is a nonprofit, should be able to do this.
Questions? Thank you. Our next speaker in opposition is Nancy Doyle.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. I've learned a lot in the past hour, and I appreciate the ability to be here and hear that, but I continue to be opposed to the project. My name is Nancy Doyle. I'm a resident of Fort Greene, where I've lived for 20 years. I strongly oppose the rezoning proposal on South Portland Avenue. I'm against the rezoning for 3 main reasons. There is an abundance of new towering high-rises in downtown Brooklyn, with many vacant units. Why? because the rent is too damn high. Infrastructure has not kept pace, traffic has increased, our quality of life has been negatively impacted. Number 2 reason, years of community efforts resulted in the 2007 contextual zoning of Clinton Hill and Fort Greene, which has already been spoken about extensively, limiting building height and density. Rolling back this hard-won protection will open the community to further destruction of the neighborhood. That's how it works. We've heard it from people who've lived here for a long time and have seen it happen inch by inch. Number 3, while I'm very grateful to the work that the church does, and I believe that the developer, MDG, spoke eloquently about their commitment to affordable housing, I'm afraid the term affordable housing has become a bit of a catch-all moniker for allowing things to happen. I've seen it happen. The developer claims to be building affordable housing, and that's a noble goal that I support in principle. But time and again, over the past 10 years, neighborhoods have seen developers get tax incentives, and the affordable housing supply does not increase significantly. The way AMI is calculated simply does not address those in real need. Developers and the elected officials they aggressively lobby use affordable housing in a self-serving way. They profit while my neighbors are displaced with ever higher rents. They profit while we send our school kids to overcrowded, underfunded schools. They profit while the quality of our neighborhood erodes. I am sick and tired of subsidizing real estate developers in my city with my tax dollars. I grew up in New York City in the 60s and 70s. My old neighborhood was on 106th Street in Manhattan, and it was an economically diverse mixed-race community, and I'm afraid to see my neighborhood, Fort Greene, changing.
Thank you, Ms. Doyle. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Fung.
Hi. We heard from the developer, not the church, that one consideration was building market rate housing there as a way, I suppose, to subsidize the work of the church in the community, since we have heard testimony from the church that they are to do good, and I think we take them at face value. Help us understand how to balance those two aspects of this land use question.
Well, I think it was spoken to by a number of people earlier, which is that one really has to step back and look at the neighborhood in the context, and not just narrow in on the good works of the church or narrow in on the need for affordable housing, which of course are both real issues. But on the bigger picture, when you look at that small historic district and the bounding area around it, and you look at those buildings towering, looming over that low-rise area, it feels to me that making this zoning change, and I'm not an expert in these matters, I'm a chef, but making this zoning change is a way to keep continually eat at something that has been kept at abeyance for some time now, for 10 years, let's say, and that what we're here to do is to say to you, please, you cannot go backwards. Once you allow for these kinds of things, what happens is it's done. The floodgates are open and it's a domino effect. And it really, we've seen it, those of us who've been around for a long time. So yes, we need affordable housing, and yes, we need for the church to continue their good works. And I do believe that there should be a way to find some compromise that allows for us to preserve the character of our neighborhood and to answer to those other issues.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Doyle.
You're welcome.
Our next speaker in opposition is Shelley Hagan.
Good morning, Commission. I was hoping I wouldn't speak, that I could give my time to Mr. Augustus, so these are just random thoughts. I heard Ms. Higgins speak very movingly about homeless people that she has seen on the sidewalks. Certainly, we are concerned about the homeless. We love the church and we love its good works. I doubt that those homeless people would be able to afford a two-bedroom apartment for $2,700 a month. I know I wouldn't, and I'm not on the street yet. But I also wonder how the project is saying that it's supplying medical when the medical already exists in the Brooklyn Medical Center. I forget what the name of it is, but it's just 2 blocks away. It fully services people already. Why this needs to be moved two blocks away is hard to understand. I think that people can make their way to Fulton Street just as easily as South Portland. While people are getting medical attention already, they also can park there. On South Portland, there will be no parking. This whole project seems to be more about rezoning than it does seem to be about affordable housing and medical attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hagan. Questions? Commissioner Deleuze. Ms. Hagan?
Hi, Shelley.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you? Good to see you. Thanks for
coming.
I just wanted to, I don't know if folks are aware, but under one of the things that Mayor de Blasio has done, given the city's homeless crisis, is new development, new affordable housing development now actually has set aside units for homeless families, and they often come with rental support. So regardless of what the rents are, they're getting rental subsidy to help do that, help pay the rent. So I think that hopefully answers some of your questions or concern about how is it possible that someone who's homeless could afford those rents. I think your point about the medical services, that's a question I have too, actually, and I'll just ask, in response to your question, and I know that the development team offered to answer additional questions and follow up in writing to differentiate the medical services that they're providing now and hopefully in the future from the medical services that are already provided on Fulton Street by another nonprofit.
We also worry that the valuable property where the medical center is now is already being targeted for a high-rise, which would motivate the move.
The one on Fulton Street?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hagan. Our next speaker in opposition is Enid Brown.
Hi, it's Enid Braun. And I've lived in New York since the late 70s, in Brooklyn for 18 years, and in Fort Greene for 13 years. It should be clear to the Commission that Fort Greene and surrounding neighborhoods oppose this rezoning that would overturn the meager protections to the neighborhood character provided by the 2007 contextual rezoning. The rationale of adjacency to the special downtown Brooklyn district to extend the special district to South Portland is the poison pill. Because where does it stop? Developers on blocks that become adjacent to the extended special district can make the same argument. More blocks and neighborhoods becoming adjacent, one by one, vulnerable to development proposals brokered through backroom deals. The community board and borough president Adams have both taken positions in support for a spot rezoning of 142-150 South Portland on the basis of the good intentions of the church, but both oppose rezoning the entire block. And just to be clear, I was at that land use committee meeting, and the confusion Mr. Augustus described, absolutely. The point was the resolution that was in favor of the church proposal was actually a substitute resolution, because the first on the application was voted down. So just to give context to that, people are in support of the intentions of the church. The community has invited the church, however, to work with a different affordable housing developer using different models of financing in order to meet its goals. Our overtures have been rebuffed. The church can provide affordable housing and other services under inclusionary housing, as was envisioned in 2007. The developer responded to this criticism of their application at the public hearings by revealing that it was city planning itself who insisted on rezoning the larger area. Please hear those of us who work and live in this neighborhood, as well as to the community board and the borough president, and affirm that this public process inherent in ULURP actually matters.
Thank you, Ms. Braun. Questions? Commissioner Deleuze.
Enid, hi.
Hi, Michelle.
How are you?
Okay.
Thanks for being here. I wanted to maybe follow up on some of the points you were making. So do you believe that at the community board level, if basically the special district expansion were removed, that then it would just focus on the church site, that there would be?
I think we'd have to see what it looked like. I will say this, and this is really what my first paragraph is about. If you upzone and break the whole concept of contextual zoning, you then create, again, precedent after precedent for this adjacency. And, I live in a block that has contextual zoning now, but is not part of the historic district. There have been predatory developers buying up houses, knocking them down, and while now they're limited as to height, I'm living with foundation damage right now from someone who bought a house during, that fell into MERS during the bubble, and they tore it down. It was a legal 3-unit building, and anyway, that's a whole personal story. But the point is, just because you've got a residential block adjacent doesn't mean it isn't vulnerable to the same thing, because once you allow these bonuses, people see dollar signs. This has nothing to do with the church. It's the zoning.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Ms. Braun. Our next speaker in opposition is Mohan Matabek. Mr. Matabek? Okay. We will then turn to, we have a speaker in support for questions, Stephen Williams from the development team. Any questions from the commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Thank you. Can you describe a little bit more the size of the church space and the total size of it, and what is there now versus what will be there in the future?
Well, currently there's a 4-story building at 152, and then there's a smaller building that has 2 stories. It's broken up into small rooms, and it's not very useful for the type of services, a lot of steps and different things that prohibit the type of services they want to provide. The new space will be on 1 floor. It'll be approximately 8,000 square feet, and it will have a multi-purpose room that will be flexible for the public meetings, the nonprofit services that meet there, and also meeting rooms for and practice rooms for the youth ministries and the youth programs, and also rooms where people the music training will happen and practices can happen.
Can I just clarify? So the 4-story building and the 2-story building, I'm assuming, are well over 8,000 square feet.
I believe they are around 8,000 square feet, around
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be helpful maybe as a part of the follow-up to understand the comparison of before and after.
I'll clarify that with the design team.
Thank you.
Commissioner Efron.
If in fact you are unable to find a medical tenant to take that 8,000 square feet that was described initially, what will happen to that space?
But the church has medical programs that they partner with outside groups. Just to go back to the medical space, that medical space that's designed there will be rented at below market rate. And we have been talking to Brooklyn Plaza, that is located on Fulton Street, but not to relocate, but they want to expand services, and they're looking at specific services that would lend itself to that site and would not entail parking. We were made with the impression we had that most of that parking is designated for physicians, and they would still retain that and would not have services that would be would need car and parking. The people would be able to take public transportation just like they do now to get to their services.
Commissioner Levin.
And is there a plan for temporary relocation of the church activities that are currently happening on the site? Obviously, they're not going to be able to stay during development. What happens in the meantime?
Yes, they're looking at, they have additional space across the street from their site. They have a large parking lot on Hanson Place and on South Portland. They're looking at different areas where they can relocate those spaces while construction's going on, and then looking for a permanent relocation for certain things they don't want to bring back into that space.
Okay, but if a parking lot is part of the temporary relocation plan, does that mean building in the parking lot?
No, it would be temporary storage so that they would be able to provide those services the way they have been now. They'll just use portions of their church facility because it's adjacent to the church to do the things that they need to be inside, and then the storage and the things that they have to have, they'll have a temporary storage set up so that it'll be convenient to still provide services.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Williams. Okay, we will now go to speakers in opposition. Rosalind Huebner. Okay, when she returns. Thank you. Joan Reuterschen. Thank you.
Good morning. Excuse me? Oh, okay, Ross, go ahead, please. I'm sorry. You weren't waiting for.
Madam Secretary, if you could reset the clock.
I'm a board member of the Fort Greene Association, and we have for years supported the food pantry at the Hanson Place Church. We support their efforts to create affordable housing. We have made suggestions as to how to more easily achieve it, and that there are agencies out there to help. I just learned today that homeless people's rents can be subsidized. I would think perhaps that this could change the figures to allow them to be able to develop this within the context of the current zoning. Excuse me, I'm out of breath. I testified at the Borough President's office in opposition. I welcomed the opportunity, as the rest of the community did. The very next day, I received a phone call from one of the attorneys for developers who expect the zoning to be changed. The next phase of building in that area. And he told me that we're wasting our time, that this is a done deal. I'll quote him in his saying, "A black church, affordable housing, done deal." He indicated that our city council person and the other electeds and council people are in favor of this. This is what I was told, and that we are kind of, spinning our wheels. We're wasting our time. So I come here today to testify and hope that that's not true. I'm feeling very uncomfortable testifying since that day and have passed on some opportunities because of it. At any rate, we are in opposition to the zoning changes to affect affordable housing when it can be accomplished within the context of the current zoning. We are in opposition to the changes that the zoning change will bring to a good part of the neighborhood, from South Portland to South Elliott down Hanson Place, on a unique block that's not so unique in New York, where there are brownstones and then there are apartment buildings or other buildings. This is even in Park Slope, and other historic communities do have this mixed, and that's why the zoning in this particular area was 7A to accommodate that, and 6A in the purely residential blocks. I also want to, my career has been in real estate. There is a glut. The sponsors are offering all kinds of incentives for people to move in, but not lowering the rents, because those rents are used as comparables. So you have a false basis for the comparable rents. Some of those comps that I heard read out at the the CB2 meeting were from One Hanson Place, which is a luxury building. So, I'm suspect now of our position here and the time we're taking to testify and bring our thoughts to this process. And I do hope you'll listen to the community.
Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. Questions?
If I may, I would just say I appreciate you coming, and it's me. Sorry.
I can't see
the
that
lights
far.
are very hard. I understand. I think we all take this ULURP process very, very seriously, each step in the process, and recognize the importance of hearing everyone's input and trying to balance all the opinions.
Thank you.
And our next speaker in opposition will be Joan Reuterschen.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Lago and honored commissioners. My name is Joan Reuterschen. 2018 marks my 50th year in New York City and my 34th in Brooklyn as a resident of Fort Greene. I live on South Portland Avenue, where I've frequently been president of the Block Association. Of all the neighborhood projects I've worked on over the decades, the 2007 rezoning of Fort Greene and Clinton Hill was absolutely the most important. The Fort Greene Association, the Society for Clinton Hill, and 75 or more local citizens participated in the surveys and the process. The contextual zoning approved by the New York City Council in July of 2007 was meant specifically to protect the particular qualities of a low-rise neighborhood, and it also created a height and density buffer between our residential district and the special downtown Brooklyn district, which is replete with new skyscrapers, as well it should be. It is downtown. On South Portland Avenue, I can tell you my neighbors would welcome 100% real affordable housing built as of right to 8 stories. But if this particular zoning change is approved that goes the entire block along Hanson Place from South Portland to South Elliott, the developers, every future developer will try to change the R7A to higher zoned areas all over the neighborhood. And there are many R7A zones on Lafayette Avenue and Fulton Street. It would really destroy the particular fabric of our neighborhood to build 13-story buildings in these R7 areas, which go through these 2 historic districts, actually 3. isn't a certain architectural consistency and integrity of New York neighborhoods one of New York's most exciting qualities? When people come to visit me, I bring them to Wall Street. I love the skyscrapers. But I also bring them to Greenwich Village, and I show them two aspects of what New York can be like. Now, we do not want a wall slicing through. Would you want to have a wall of high buildings slicing through Greenwich Village? Certainly, we don't want to have the downtown Brooklyn district extended through and into Fort Greene. And if this particular project is approved, other developers will follow and do the same. Again, downtown Brooklyn is great, but we are not that, and we don't want to become that. We would welcome the church to build 8 stories of affordable housing as of right. But with this increased FAR, doubling the FAR and increasing the height to 13, it will bring the density, shadows, traffic, noise, pollution that we in a low-rise residential district do not want. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I
Ms.
just think
Rudershine.
there has to be a way to do it in a different fashion. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Our next speaker in opposition is Jason Salmon.
I think it's the afternoon by now. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Salmon. I work for Senator Montgomery. I'm also a lifelong resident of Clinton Hill, Fort Greene, and seeing the extreme gentrification and displacement that has happened in the 31 years that I've lived there. I will read a statement in Senator Montgomery's behalf. I respectfully request that you reject the recent ULURP land use review application submitted by the South Portland LLC and Randolph Daycare Center, Inc. regarding the proposed redevelopment of 142-150 South Portland Avenue. In 2007, Fort Greene Clinton Hill was rezoned in an effort to protect and preserve the predominantly brownstone character of the neighborhood's residential core. The block in question is a part of the contextual rezoning area. If this ULURP is approved, it will impose non-contextual height and density and open the door to further such applications in the area moving forward. A large number of constituents have raised concerns as to why MDG construction didn't apply for a variance, but instead applied for a rezoning which would not be limited to the proposed development site. This approach seems to be indicative of a larger agenda that extends past developing 142-150 South Portland Avenue. My constituents have expressed that approving this application would betray the trust of Fort Greene Clinton Hill residents. Lastly, I am well aware of the church's long-standing history with the Fort Greene community and the good work they have done in the area. It occurs to me that there has to be a better way for the Seventh-day Adventist Church of Hanson Place to expand their community services, provide affordable housing, and develop their property without rezoning the entirety of the block in question. Partnering with a reputable nonprofit who specializes in developing affordable housing would be a good place to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. Questions? Okay, we will then move on to our next speaker in opposition, Roy Rogers.
Thank you, thank you. First of all, let me say, I hope that none of you up there will take anything I say personally. There's no saying you can fool all the people some of the time, or you can fool all the people some of the time and some of the people all the time, but you can't fool all the people all of the time. When I hear affordable housing and around the city, and I've been going all across all 5 boroughs, I think of a big scam. The City Department of Planning, rezoning, and affordable housing plans across the city are doing great harm to the vast majority of residents and small businesses and actually fuel the homelessness crisis. The City Department Planning rezoning plans are not community plans, but the rezoning schemes of REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York, as dictated to the mayor and city council speaker and targeted city council members. REBNY more appropriately stands for the real estate bullies of New York, ravaging every borough of New York City. Rebney is run by a cartel of billionaire developers, landlords, and property speculators who are transforming the city into Rebneyville, a city for the elite and not friendly to the 99%. The story of irresponsible rezoning policies is being repeated all across the city. I've been to Inwood, Harlem. I live in East Harlem. I came down here to support the people in Fort Greene, other places of Brooklyn, the Bronx, you name it, all over the city. Rezoning, rezoning, rezoning. It's got nothing to do. These community groups spend years planning, okay, for real planning for the community. Then when it comes to the City Department of Planning and the Economic Development Corporation, they're taking things from the mayor. The mayor's pockets are full of Rebney cash, and they end up with something that is not good for the community and is not good for the city. So these, whether it's the building of luxury high-rises and the bulldozing of communities, destruction of schools, libraries, hospitals, churches, historic buildings, and the manufactured gentrification, or what we call hyper-gentrification on steroids, causing massive displacement of tenants, lack of affordable housing, and record numbers of closures of small businesses throughout the city are a direct result of Rebney's rezoning policies. And I hate to say this, and I'll end with this real quick. The mayor and the speakers, unfortunately, the past and the present speakers of the City Council, the EDC Economic Development Corporation, and yes, the City Department of Planning, as has been written in a number of books by experts, have all been shilling for the Real Estate Board of New York, and this must stop. I hope you'll stop it right here and support what people in the community are saying about the fraud called affordable housing and what they're trying to do to Fort Greene. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Questions? We will then turn to our next speaker in opposition, Lucy Cottine.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioner and Committee. Michelle. My name is Lucy Cottine. I live a few blocks from the proposed application. I've lived in the neighborhood since 1977. Excuse me, I have a cold. I apologize. This is not about housing. This is not about affordable housing. This is not about a church's good intentions. This is about trust and a contract with the community. This is about government not betraying a commitment to the people who pay the taxes and do the work to safeguard their neighborhoods. This is about This is about a commitment to keep zoning that was put into place to protect against this very kind of intrusion, against the adding of more bulk and more height into a residential neighborhood that endangers the neighborhood character. We hear that this year it is a few more stories that they want to add than what is to prevent the next zoning change request that the developer seeks, adding just another couple of stories. Why should communities and community boards bother getting involved in civics if a few short years later a developer under the cloak of a church work be allowed to overthrow what was so hard fought and accomplished by people just like us? We ask you not to betray us by permitting this unnecessary upzoning which opens the gates to further abuse. And again, and know your history. One, the current zoning was supported by then Brooklyn City Planning Commissioner Regina Meyer. She supported creating a buffer between the residential neighborhoods and the downtown business district. This rezoning will eliminate the buffer. Two, in a thesis called Contextual Zoning is a City Planning Tool, written by Rachel Levy in May 2015, in her introduction she states, contextual zoning is a planning tool used to preserve neighborhood character and promote desirable development. It has increasingly been applied to the distinctive historic neighborhoods of New York City to ensure a visual relationship between new development and the surrounding built environment. As a zoning device, this approach is rooted in the domain of urban planning, having been conceived in New York City by the Department of City Planning in the 1980s. In short, do not betray a principle that was founded in smart urban planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cottine. Questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I just, I wanted to add something. I got a couple, sorry. Just real quick.
And you could actually submit anything in writing, which will
okay.
then come to the commissioners.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker in opposition is Patty Hagan.
Good morning, Euler City. Good Euler morning, City Planning Commissioners. My name is Patty Hagan, a 20th century immigrant from Manhattan. I came across the Brooklyn Bridge, lured by the chance to live in human-scale, low-rise housing with history, an old genius loci. Big Sky, Brooklyn. I could see the verdigris tops of the tallest buildings in Brooklyn Heights, the Gothic steeples of the Brooklyn Bridge. I always knew what time it was. I just looked at the Williamsburg Clock Tower. 4 faces. In 2007, the City Planning Commission joined Community Board 2, Fort Greene Association, Society for Clinton Hill, Regina Meyer, along the ULURP Trail in support of contextual zoning for historic Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, because, and I quote from the City Planning Report, recent development pressures have threatened to disrupt the consistent character that has contributed to the neighborhood's revitalization. Buildings greater than 7 stories, imagine that. Buildings greater than 7 stories threaten to overwhelm and significantly alter the character of the neighborhood, close quote. I'm here today as a neighborhood witness. I ask that city planning reaffirm that prescient 2007 contextual zoning, no exceptions, no loopholes at 140 to 152 South Portland, Hanson Place, South Elliott Place. The overdevelopment pressures on Brooklyn in 2018 are much more threatening. As of right is not threatening. Dear Church, please build as of right affordable housing. Please stand with Community Board 2 and the community. City planning. No to the out-of-place South Portland upzoning. No to intruding the downtown Brooklyn Special District into historic Fort Greene. Historic Fort Greene is not downtown Brooklyn. Downtown Brooklyn would be and is totally out of place in contextually zoned Fort Greene, Clinton Hill. Keep downtown Brooklyn downtown. At this point, I feel like a Brooklyn Joan Didion, usurping towards zoning bedlam. Contextual zoning ain't broke. So please, city planning, don't nix it.
Thank you, Ms. Hagan. Questions? Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
No question, just forever remembering how eloquent you can be, Patty. Thanks for being here.
I missed you at Joyce Bake Shop this morning.
Well, that eloquence is from the last speaker who has signed up to speak on this matter, but if anyone who is present would like to be heard, who has not spoken before, now would be the time. Okay, so the public hearing is closed. Thank you to all who participated.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Melanie Myers. I'm a partner with Fried, Frank, Harris, Shriver, and Jacobson. You look lovely, by the way. Just so you know, these pictures, everybody should wear blue. It looks really great. So thank you for having us. I'm representing Times Square Hotel Owner LLC. They're the applicant for a zoning text amendment that will modify 2 aspects of the theater subdistrict signage regulations. The applicant is the owner of a property known as 1568 Broadway. It's in the heart of Times Square, and it is also, among other things, the home of the Palace Theater. The text amendments will allow for one aspect of kind of an overall reconception
portion of the building on the site. The first change would allow for the required Times Square signage to be made up of a single sign element instead of multiple elements, and that would be subject to a chair certification. That would be based on a finding that the sign will provide the same sort of visual interest that furthers the goals of the theater subdistrict. The second change would allow for the same sign to rise without a setback to its full height of required height of 120 feet, and would allow for terraces to be used behind the sign for, among other things, entertainment and related uses. And I will see if I can move it. This is really sort of showing the scope of the text change on what is actually a quite large building. On the left-hand side, I'm a little dyslexic with the, you sort of see the scale of the sign itself, which is again a required element today, but it would be of a more uniform appearance. And you can see, I think a little bit on the left-hand side, that one of the elements would include an operable door window that we're very excited about. On the right-hand side, you see that same image in section, and what it shows is the sign elements going up for the full height with the opportunities for creating these spaces both behind the sign that we're pretty excited about. What it doesn't quite show, and when Paul starts to speak, you'll hear about that, is that if you sort of look to the right of the portion that we're talking about, what's behind it actually is the lobby for the Palace Theater. And so the opportunities for synergies between inside and outside is something we're very, very excited about. We're very pleased to receive an almost unanimous approval from the community board and as well as the borough president's support. And I think what they were excited about was both the innovation of this portion of the project, but the project itself. And so I know that, Commissioner Levin had asked at review session about talking about a little bit about the project as a whole, which Paul will do. I wanted to respond to one of the technical questions we heard, which is sort of how the revocable consent piece of it sort of fits in and how that works. And so it's difficult to see, but the portion of the project that's subject to the revocable consent is this very kind of narrow strip. It's you're not going to be able to read it looking at what I'm looking at. It's about a 4.5-foot strip of occupiable space on each of the terraces as they move up. It's the space that people can walk on that's outside of the property line and behind the sign, as well as there's an existing marquee today, which is going to be opened up for performances that will be facing outward as well as inward to the space, and that's part of the revocable consent. The Department of Transportation has a formula for establishing the fee. It's not negotiated, or at least we didn't negotiate it. And just for the record, it's about $260,000 for the first year, and then there's annual increases above that. So that's what I have to say. And if there's no questions for me at this point, I'll turn it over to Paul.
If you could finish the presentation, and then we'll have questions.
Great. I thank the Commission for the opportunity to present our project today. I appreciate the work that each of the commissioners do and staff every day as stewards of the urban fabric of New York. It was 30 years ago that I began my career, and it was an honor and privilege to work in Times Square at the time. I recollect city planning's recasting the zoning provisions that we use today, and I became a student and an admirer of it. They were critical, along with the landmarks moves, to not only support Times Square's unique history, but also its innovation and its effective growth. The irony in 1986 was many of the projects that were being designed at the time actually didn't address the public realm. They were great projects, large projects that were promoting growth, but they really didn't consider the pedestrian experience, 300-foot long or high sheer walls, large mechanical spaces, et cetera, that face the square. So the irony is we had one of the greatest public spaces, certainly in New York, but if not in the world, and the projects weren't addressing it. So fast forward to today, we're honored and privileged and humbled to be able to redevelop a project that will in fact honor and execute the objectives of the special district regulations. Commissioner Levin asked about the impact on the street, and it's appropriate that many of the opportunities for improvement start with our wonderful 1980s property. If I can push forward. There we go. So in the lower left-hand corner is a drawing of the existing project, and you can see that it's quite dark. It's very difficult to recognize the theater. One doesn't realize that there's a subway entrance there. In some cases, the ceiling heights below the existing sign go below 9 feet over public spaces. On 47th Street, we have 1913 fire escapes that are cascading down to the image in the middle bottom, and that occupies some 16,000 cubic feet of New York light and air outside of the property line. So we think this is a pretty good example of 80s design and not paying attention to the public realm, so absent a few shoulder pads, it looks pretty much like 1980s design. So we think we can do something significant with that, and when we start, we want to start by honoring the history of signage innovation in Times Square. As long as the history is of Broadway, there's a history of innovative commercialism, and signage along with Broadway is what attracts the world to come to Times Square, and we want to deliver on that promise. So when we look at our sign, we have a 18,000 square foot sign with 24 million LED pixels. It took 2 years to develop the back end just to process the image at this scale and resolution. And then we're very excited about an 8% of the sign. We actually created a window onto Times Square and into the cultural activities that are behind the square. And that's the image that you see in the left-hand side shows the extent of the opening. On 47th Street, just to get specific to Commissioner Levin's inquiry, when we remove the fire escapes and we're able to raise the theater that has been approved by landmarks, we're able to create a massive presence for the Palace Theater and a new marquee and a new entrance. So juxtaposing what you have today to what you will have on the right is an example of what we think the spirit and intent of the zoning resolution was for presenting entertainment and retail use at the ground plane. And then juxtaposing, looking around the corner further, we're able to take the bottom of the sign and raise it to 26 feet to bring more light and air to the sidewalk and to present a world-class retail experience that we ensure will be successful. The key thing about successful retail is having people happy to be able to walk down the street in front of it, and certainly we've turned something that on the left is very dark and unhappy to something that on the right is welcoming and terrific to walk by. We also have to honor the tradition of Broadway and Broadway theaters. This is the most famous of the Broadway theaters, and this corner in particular has been the home of the live arts and everything from openings of movies to presentations of products and promotions of products. It's the longest standing place of presenting things at that scale in all of Times Square. The theater itself, we are doing a wonderful house auditorium renovation, restoration, but we are also adding some 10,000 square feet to the back of house. The long-term competitiveness of Times Square is critical, and the Broadway theaters that support it. The section is shown where you can see on the right, this is an east-west section showing where the theater is positioned, and it indicates the connection that Melanie talked about to the marquee opening and the synergies that the entertainment and attraction uses would have with that opening. And finally, the image that you see in front of you is the opening itself. This was presented to PDC and approved, and it shows the visual interest when the sign opens. There's a portion of the sign that retracts, but that LED remains active, and so it's an engaging and animated experience whether it's open or closed. Thank you.
Magical timing. Questions from the commission?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
I have a question about the sound.
Yes.
If in fact the
space becomes a performance space, how does somebody hear and who hears?
So if there's any external performance, that would be produced in collaboration and coordination with the Times Square Alliance and all of the agencies that have jurisdiction. So anytime we're projecting anything in the way of sound outside of the property line, we would have to comply with those requirements. So it would be an unusual thing from an everyday standpoint. We're in the position where we see this more as an animated cuckoo clock of things where you're able to see in and see out on a routine basis. And then when we're producing something that is projecting sound into the square, that would be done within the same confines and the agencies that control that activity now.
So there would only be sound if there was a permitted activity?
A sound that's projected exterior to the property is a requirement that it precipitates a permitted event, yes.
But otherwise there would be sound going the other direction to your performance balconies?
Correct, within the property line, absolutely.
Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
Can you maybe put the image up that shows the space behind the sign? I think that Melanie said it's 4.5 feet. So that is open to the sky at the top, is that correct?
It has a gap. There's a 5-foot structure of the sign itself. Mm-hmm. And then the balcony goes up to, and there's a gap between that structure and the back of the sign structure itself.
It's sort of seven.
Yeah, so you can see it at the top there in the mm-hmm. diagram.
And how would people access that area?
So you'd access it in the same way that you would any other part of the building. So if you took the sign off and it didn't exist, you'd look at a building with a series of balconies and terraces on it, and those terraces would be extensions of the use that's to the interior, along with intercommunicating circulation that you would see from one balcony to the next balcony.
Okay, and if I may, and where does it exit? Where do the balconies exit?
So they exit into the interior as part of the fire egress of the building itself.
So they don't exit directly onto the street at any point?
Not at all. Not at all. In fact, all the discharge that currently takes up 47th Street, that volume has been brought into the building. Mm-hmm. The egress of the theater has been brought up to 2014 code standards. The theater and its egress pathways, which are unsprinklered now, will be sprinklered and properly signed, et cetera.
May I ask one more? And under the proposed change, like how would the functioning of the theater be impacted, and for what period of time?
So the theater, during the construction, and we have a letter that permits this, but it is a closure of the theater while under construction for obvious reasons, and that period is going to be approximately 34 months.
There is so much about this that is exciting, but one part that I find difficult to fit within the finding that there's the same visual interest. When there is a performance facing inward, where someone presumably will have paid for the theater performance, how is seeing the back of that performance from the street providing visual interest? I understand when you get the permits and there's a performance that is facing Times Square that could enliven it, but seeing the back of performers' backs doesn't seem to generate the same excitement as the rest of the signage.
It's a very good question. I probably could start answering that with a little anecdote, if that's okay. So I grew up with 2 ballerinas in my family. I wasn't one, but 2 of my sisters were. And pretty good ones, the prima ballerina in Canada, et cetera. And I probably went to, 400 performances, and most of which I stood at side stage and backstage, which I weirdly thought was much cooler than being in the audience. And it was a way in which I could see something and really see part of it. So the side or the backstage thing was actually something that was more interesting and kind of insightful. So that would be one anecdote. So I perceive it a little bit differently than front and back. It's really theater in the round if we are presenting something that would be just as interesting to look at from the outside as it is from the inside.
If I could hone in on that, because having had that privilege as well of standing, there's a proximity as opposed to something that is many feet up in the air and recessed in. So how does one perceive the intimacy that you're describing, which makes backstage so exciting?
Well, you have the opportunity to, as a person in the public, to be able to access the entertainment and attraction area in a much more financially accessible way than you would going to a seated performance in Broadway, number one. But number two, looking from the outside, when the sign retracts, the sign doesn't turn off or disappear. The sign portion that there is retracted and becomes a backdrop. So you do have still a large scale presentation, and that compels whatever's being done there to also address the street at the same time as it's addressing the interior viewer.
Vice Chair Nichols.
The terminology retail-entertainment,
yes,
which could be read as entertainment related retail, as opposed to just retail. What do you envision in those spaces?
So one of the obligations of being a good real estate developer, and I think we try very hard to do that, is to be aware of where retail's going. Everybody talks about retail being in a dislocated state and it's a catastrophe and et cetera going on, but we actually see in our conversations with leading thinkers of retail, it's really about creating an experience. So I have 3 daughters. They can buy almost anything on a phone faster than we can get down the block. So there has to be a reason for someone to come here and to be engaged. So retailers are thinking about synergizing with elements of entertainment. So in a simple way, across the street, we leased to Hershey's, a large storefront, about 9,000 square feet, and they have a hot chocolate bar. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is all part of this idea of creating an experience of why somebody has to show, because I can buy Hershey's candy all day long on my cell phone. I don't have to go to a store, but I go to a store because I can get a hot chocolate and a s'mores, and it's a cool place, and you get a bigger candy bar than you can online. And so that's the kind of retail experience at a very low level that all the major brands are thinking of, whether it's an NFL or it's an Adidas or it's a Samsung. All of these companies are looking at retail as an entertainment and experience. Otherwise, there's not a reason to show up.
Commissioner Afram.
So I guess I share our chair's questions, and part of my reasoning about the sound was to try to understand whether there's almost a negative effect for the public when things are oriented toward the paying public on the inside, but still retain transparency. And while there's the visual question, which I think is significant because will you have a requirement that every performer have both a theater facing and a Times Square facing production, and will you require that the value of those productions be the same? It seems sort of unlikely. And similarly, will there be kind of the excess noise that comes from the back of a production coming out onto the street as opposed to the high quality noise going into, or the high quality sound going into the performance? So I understand the theory of the theater in the round, but I just wonder about the practicality of the cost of production and what ends up being sort of the negative or excess coming to the public versus the priority and highly choreographed production going toward the paying private.
So if I could broaden the perspective of performance. So we participate currently and have, for instance, in Midnight Moments at Times Square. So the Times Square Alliance sponsors at the art programs. We participated in launching JR's global, who's a French artist, global introduction of his urban art in Times Square. So let's talk just a moment about a media artist that came as part of that. And there was an installation. That installation, the technology of the sign allows us to integrate that and create a multimedia experience where, even though it's a pretty small opening, it's only 8% of the entire sign, the visual impact of that can be amplified so that it is visually engaging, and it really isn't about sound or a speaker speaking or an actor acting, but it's equally interesting and animated. So that's how we think about assuring it, that the technology of the sign is able to integrate into what's happening, to be able to visually amplify that in a way that doesn't impact the square from a sound standpoint.
Can I continue for just a minute? So there's a commercial viability of any project, and there's no reason there shouldn't be. But there's a tension between the commercial viability for something produced for a smaller number of people on the interior of the building versus the commercial viability of something produced, a product launch, an artist launch, for a large number of people on the outside of the building. I am concerned that the production for those paying on the inside may actually be the opposite of a benefit to the people on the outside when it's not intended for them.
Right.
How do we have some assurance? Is there anything in your proposed license agreements or production agreements that would make sure that the quality for the public on the outside, when you're effectively hanging out over the street, even though they're paying people on the inside, is of equal value or of some value?
The best answer that I can respond is the sign itself and the structure of the sign costs tens of millions of dollars. And it's something that is external facing in every aspect of our economic underwriting on it. And so the impetus, first and foremost, is to present an engaging and animated exterior image, because if people aren't interested in looking at the sign, then we've failed in the commercial purpose of this tens of millions of dollars of investment. So that's the number one thing. It will always be engaging to the exterior. Secondary to that is to be able to have an interesting experience in the space that surrounds the theater, and hopefully a way that is complementary to it, the Palace Theater. And that would be something that people would pay for, but it would be a much more accessible price point. And we want that to be interesting, and we don't see those as conflicting. We see those as complementary. So the interesting perspective when I use the backstage analogy is I'm thinking about this as outward facing, and the people who are in the property are actually on the side stage relationship to what's going on the most frequent basis. And in that way, it's something that balances the population interest, right, to the public realm versus the private realm.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, I'm almost hesitant to wade into this conversation, but I can't help myself here. A number of things you said, I think, really resonated with me, and I study retail. It's the work that I do, and we talk a lot about ambient entertainment and the value of creating interesting environments that offer you something unique and different that you can't get online, for instance. And so, I think about the morning shows where, people are crowded around outside to see the back of the shows and to see what's happening without necessarily hearing what's happening inside, but they stand around in the morning, and it creates such a destination for people from all over the country and world to come to New York to see something unique and interesting they wouldn't find anywhere else. So, I hear you. I think I am, understanding of that perspective, and perhaps open to that. And I will leave that there.
Well, I think that's am I permitted to respond to that, or I guess add to that? I think that's an excellent example of the scale difference between a group of people that are watching a production intimately, and that's super interesting. So imagine those are the people, in fact, that are standing around something that's going on. And then there's a broadcast side to that, which is ironically the public-facing side of that, right? And that broadcast component can be integrated into the sign because of our robust back end. So that kind of scale difference, the urban scale interest at the same time as, hey, it's kind of cool to be sitting next to you and watch you getting interviewed, is the dynamic that we're trying to set up.
I would note that I would have a very different reaction were this not in public space, and the finding that is required that it has the same visual interest. Yes, Commissioner Deleuze.
So just to follow up with that, because and maybe I'm misunderstanding. So is part of the intention when the space is open and you're seeing let's just say the back of the performers, that the rest of the sign is projecting the front?
Yes. So again, I would discourage the characterization that you're looking at the back of the performers, because I think that's a certain scale of performance that's different. So
Maybe I can frame the question differently. Did you consider having either the rest of the sign or a portion of the sign projecting what's going on in the front, while folks are having more of the intimate perspective about while the opening is there? Was that considered?
Yes. So we see content as opposed to a flipping of a magazine page, which is what you have right now in Times Square. What you have is a scrolling set of ads that are just running, and there's no content, performance content or cultural content on the signs, except for the brilliant work that the Times Square Alliance does with these midnight moments. So we do see actually content being connected to the performance that's going on and projected in the environment of the sign to be able to amplify it and make it more interesting.
Yes, Commissioner Cirillo.
I guess I just there we go. So I guess I begin this, just the thought process sort of in the same place as you, Commissioner Ortiz, and don't have a sort of organic issue with this. But I do have a question about the types of things that might occur there that raises issues, because I can think sort of long-term what kinds of things could occur there. Do you see this space as being something that would be event-driven, like one thing, or is it something that there would be a performance or a show or an experience that would run over a period of time? How do you see the use of this space?
I think it's all of the above, in the sense that to me, if you were in our development partnership, there's an aspect that Times Square has about time, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things that a normal intermittent opening and closing of this as part of an animated event of the sign in and of itself is interesting and cool. Mm-hmm. And we would see that routinely happening. And then once in a while, they'll be coordinated to something that would be a larger event, hopefully, or not hopefully, absolutely in concert with the Times Square Alliance to be able to show what we can do. Because one of the things that is the biggest problem being a community member in Times Square is a wonderful place, but there's a lot of stuff that goes along with doing something. There's trucks, there's generators, there's big black wires, there's all these things that go in and attenuate the impact of something that happens in Times Square. And what we see is we see ourselves playing a small part of infrastructure that avoids that kind of public impact, so there can be the benefit of the interest without the setup and breakdown that happens right now, which is quite torturous.
Mm-hmm. I asked the question because I could almost imagine, not to sort of advocate, but I'm sharing my feeling about this in the conversation, that if a production knew they were performing in this space, which I'm assuming they would know, that it would be choreographed in such a way that would be as engaging to the inside and the outside at some point in it. Obviously, there are paying ticket holders, but that this goes to the definition, I guess, which I don't have enough knowledge about perhaps what has been, sort of precedent setting for what is visually of visual interest. I personally think that as a New Yorker and somebody who deals with tourists, and anything that goes on in a New York street is sort of visually interesting to some degree. That may not meet the standard, but we do stop and watch the backs of, anchor people on the news. We catch a corner of a film shoot. We'll stop and what. So I think visual interest to me meant, wow, this is visually interesting if you're outside and you can see something that engages you, that to me, but I don't know if that's the standard, what the definition, if there even is one. I guess it's, if there's a sort of a discretionary thought process of what we consider visually interesting, if it's personal to us, then I personally see that as being okay. But I don't know what the sort of legal standard is, if there is one. But I do think, on the other hand, if we were sitting here and discussing everything going on the inside and missing an opportunity to open up this sort of fourth wall in a sort of interesting, or the fifth wall, whatever we want to call this wall, right. We would have missed an opportunity to bring the public into live performance, even if they're not sitting in the theater, watching and hearing it, but we're engaging the public in a way that might open the minds of people who may want to see something in a different way. Yeah. So that's just my sort of take on this.
I think your commentary is exactly right. And if you look at the weighting of space, that there's a smaller amount of space that's immediately accessible behind the sign and the sign opening, right? So there's a depth limitation to it. It's not a theater of, an amphitheater of people that are looking down on it. So the weighting inherently, and we talk about what really could limit the unreasonable focus on the inside as opposed to the outside, is exactly that. If I'm producing something there and I have this opportunity to open it up, I am for sure going to be conscious of the scale of the opportunity, the scale of the artistic opportunity. And then, by the way, I need to make sure that the people that are on the side stage are in a place where they're interested also. Mm-hmm. So I see the weighting in that just by the disposition of the space and the scale of the opportunity to impact, whether I'm a product launch person or I'm a artist that wants to do something.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commission? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
This is going to sound like I wasn't paying attention from the very beginning. I'm having a hard time understanding how you get an inside and an outside here. How does the marquee opening, is it created by pulling the wall of the signage back into the building, in which case isn't it opaque? And how do people see inside? If you're inside the building, how are you seeing through the sign?
Right, so the surface of the sign retracts, and it has two pathways to retract. It can go straight back as a staged backdrop.
In which case, you're still not seeing into the theater, and when you're in the theater, you're not seeing out. It's right. Just that wall is closer to you.
Right, and then the other is, it opens up like a door that way. Okay. So it becomes two flanking parts of the stage framing into the space right behind. But you can see the historic theater lobby backs right up to the position of the marquee opening.
Right, so there's not so much visible opportunity from within the building into the marquee opening space, right? The real point of this is to project onto.
Well, that's what I was saying, that there's less space, just fundamentally there's less space. So if you're going to be facing anywhere, the strong disposition is to be facing out, just the architectural.
And it's open to the elements at that point, right? When it's open? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then back to the whole point that we're here, which is to talk about the use of the space that's behind the sign, which extends into the public realm. You talked about interconnections, it being used for interconnections, and we have one of the images that was in our briefing materials, is not part of your display, showed a whole series of escalators. How is it intended that those will be used? Will there be single tenants on all those, individual tenants on all those floors, and customers passing up and down? Who's using those escalators?
So we see it, it's very unlikely that there'll be individual independent operations on floors. We see it as really a block of space that is below the setback and above the marquee level. So if you look at the section, there's the label marquee opening, and then there are effectively 4 floors above that. So that block of 4 floors plus the marquee opening we see as a very likely block of operation. So it would be a series of things. So in our fantasy, it's a backstage Broadway exhibit and interesting attraction. So somebody can go there, there's a series of interesting performances, exhibits, etc. And someone would pay a ticket to go through that experience, and there'll be some retail things, and there'll be some food and beverage things that are associated with it, and there'll be a short performance that's associated with it. That's a likely scenario for that space. And then the next big block is the retail space itself, and where you'd see a more normal demising of maybe 2 or 3 tenants in that lower block between the lower level 1, lower level 2, first floor, and second floor. So it wouldn't be a floor by floor disposition of that.
Okay, but then the escalators behind the sign, would that be the primary means for people to move from floor to floor? Or is there internal circulation as well?
Well, there's fire stairs and there's elevators for ADA access, et cetera, but most of these forward-leaning retail and entertainment concepts are about flow, and you're moving people through, so the escalators would be a series of things that facilitate that flow. But you'll have elevator access from the first floor and fire egress, of course.
Okay, so but the escalators then that are in the public space, which is why we're talking about this text amendment, are really integral. You see them as being integral to the operation of those 4 floors that are labeled entertainment attraction.
Yes.
Okay.
And there wouldn't be access to the escalators absent paying a fee to enter the attraction?
Correct, because you'd come through a security position to do so.
Other questions for the applicant team?
I just want
Knuckles.
I just want to nail down my earlier question, and you explained, I think, quite clearly the retail entertainment concept. But on the ground floor where there's just retail, I mean, there wouldn't be a deli there, right? I mean, there'd be some nexus to the larger entertainment envelope, or would it be just market retail, whatever the...
Well, so the first floor is fairly large, because we have about 100 feet of frontage along 7th Avenue, and then it extends about 160 feet deep to the east. So it's a pretty large footprint. So it's very likely that will be divided into multiple tenants that are accessing up and accessing down. So the attraction experience that I just reviewed is likely to have a very small footprint in part of that, and vertical transportation. So multiple elevators going up, most likely to the floor right below the terrace, and then the escalators are used to allow people to flow down. And then beside that small footprint would be a major brands storefront that would go deep into the space and potentially connect to the second floor. And like most of these brands, the second floor might be something that's an experience that they have to go through the store and get to and then come down. And then the last most likely thing is the kind of corner piece that's remaining, which would be a piece that most likely brings somebody from the first floor down into the 2 lower levels of retail. And that's the sort of most likely way in which the first floor would provide access to these program pieces.
So it might be a deli.
It might be a really cool deli, maybe.
You looking for the Edison lunch counter to come?
Yeah.
Okay, well then, thank you to the applicant team. And we now have a speaker in support, Frank Lizardo.
Good afternoon, Chair Longo, Commissioners. My name is Frank Lizardo. I'm a trustee as well as an executive board member and representative Local 1 of the IATSE. I'm here today to speak in support of this project. It was 30 months ago that Mayfield Development began a methodical process to execute what IATSE Local 1 believes is the most important development in a generation for the Theater District and Local 1. It is only through their diligent and passionate commitment to Times Square, Broadway, and New York City does a vision like this become reality. We've stood before the Landmarks Commission, we've stood before the community boards, and I stand here again today to personally express Local 1's support for the Palace 1568 Broadway project. We're the oldest entertainment union in the United States and the premier stagehand union of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, representing over 138,000 members. Local 1's presence on Broadway spans over 130 years and will continue as long as Broadway and the live arts are properly supported. Our members' lives and the city's remarkable attraction to the world are sustained by entertainment in Times Square Special District. The Palace 1568 Broadway project embodies like no other what we cherish as the very purpose of the Special District. Sustaining and expanding the live arts on Broadway is the life of Times Square. We have reviewed the project designs and understand them well and support the adoption of the proposed zoning text change. The theater alone will be the most comprehensive restoration ever in the Theater District. At Palace 1568 Broadway, we have a development team in Mayfield and L&L who are willing to direct over $2 billion into a project delivering significant economic benefits to the members of the IATSE and the city. The ambitious redevelopment project deserves our community's support, and you can be assured that our 138,000 plus members stand behind it. With the development partnership's ability to create projects and attract investment, no other development team demonstrates a greater belief in Times Square and the very CPC goals outlined within the Special District's resolution. Palace 1568 Broadway will anchor the live arts of Broadway in the Times Square district for the next 130 years in the one location befitting that awesome obligation. Local 1 now asks you to seize this rare moment with us and ensure the CPC completes their approval of the proposed text change with our full and complete support. We completely support. We think this is a wonderful project, and it's great for our members, it's great for the community, and I just hope that you feel the same. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Thank you. Our next speaker in support is Billy Rickling.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the time. My name is Billy Richling. I'm here on behalf of Tim Tompkins, the president of the Times Square Alliance. We're the business improvement district for the area. And the message I bring you on behalf of Tim is one of support, both for the development in general and for this particular zoning amendment. We're excited because we think that obviously signs and advertising are a key part of the distinctive character of Times Square, and we see this as a new innovation and a new evolution of that distinctive element. We also believe that the approval of this amendment will lead to even more exciting entertainment options for the district. The Alliance has been a part of this design process in one form or another since its beginning, and I think we've gotten a sense that Paul and his team are committed to doing something that is both commercially viable and also is really supporting the arts and the culture in the district. We think this has the potential to create jobs in arts and hospitality and retail, and to ensure Times Square's legacy as a center for those industries. We're also excited about the public realm improvements. Paul showed you the 47th Street improvements, and we think that could have a really significantly positive impact on the area. You know, they've made an effort in this project and in other things they've done in the area to minimize any negative impact on the surrounding blocks. They've made a consistent effort to check in with us, with other community stakeholders, and we and they are committed to ensuring that this project goes off without a hitch and has a really positive impact on the area. In short, I'll just say that we believe this will have a positive impact on the many constituencies that call Times Square home. We're excited about the possibilities for the Palace Theater, and we urge you to support this plan. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Richland. Commissioner Efron.
Thank you. Is Mayfield or any of the principals of anyone involved in this development on the board of the bid?
Mayfield is not on our board, as far as I'm aware.
You mentioned another developer associated with it. I was just wondering if they were a bid member. Was it L&L?
Yeah, L&L, we're not either.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I'm wondering if the Times Square Alliance has considered how this zoning text amendment might be used on other sites within the bid boundaries.
Sure, that's something that came up during the community board meeting. You know, as of now, it's not something we're particularly concerned about impacting the public space in a negative way. I think that obviously over time, the way these signs operate and the ways they're used will evolve. We see our role as being sort of stewards of the public realm and ensuring that however those signs evolve in the future, we manage with care and with thought, and they have a positive impact on everyone that uses the space.
But surely there must be plenty of locations within Times Square that have a sign big enough, or a sign surface big enough to qualify for this text, right? Or is this likely to be a unique situation?
You know, I can't say, I can't predict the future, unfortunately. I think at this point, this is a pretty unique project. It's possible that this will be applicable in future projects, but as far as I know, there's nothing else sort of on the books.
Okay.
We can address that in the review session, asking the applicant where they see other applicability and are taking a look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Richling.
Thank you.
Those are the only speakers on this item, but if anyone in the audience wanted to be heard, now's the time. Then the public hearing is closed.
Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 10, CD2, C150348ZSM. A public hearing in the matter of an application for the grant of a special permit concerning 85 Mercer Street.
Our first speaker in support is Eric Palatnik.
Hello, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. I'm here today with the development team for 85 Mercer Street, which is pictured on the screen in front of you. It's a retail application in Soho, not nearly as exciting as the last one you had. There are no sliding walls, there's no interactive entertainment. We're basically just crossing our fingers we'll find the tenants by the time we're done with this at this point. It's an application. We attended your review session yesterday, and we heard you wanted to hear from the broker, and Brandon Charnas of Cushman Wakefield is here. He's been spearheading the efforts to rent the space through the past year and a half or 2 years or so. The space has been marketed aggressively since 2013. It started off being marketed at a rate of $150 a square foot. It came under some pressure in 2015. There was a big discussion in the Soho district, as I'm sure you're familiar with the Manhattan Borough President and the Community Board, and they called us into a meeting and they asked us to drop our asking rents, which we dropped substantially down to $80 and $70 a square foot. We've been marketing in quite a few publications, and I'll take you through right here. Cut right to the chase, because I know that's what you asked about yesterday. This right here is gives you the good faith marketing efforts of the applicant, and it shows you that since 2013 we've been advertising the New York Times, the Village Voice, Chelsea Now, Downtown Express, the East Villager, the Villager, Gay City, and Manhattan Express, and those are just the traditional hard copy newspapers. Online, which is obviously the way most things are being done right now, as we just heard just from the retail discussion, Kalman Dalgen has been handling most of the marketing in the manufacturing sector. They're very well respected manufacturing industrial realtors, very well known. I'm sure you've heard of them, and they've been marketing aggressively since 2013. It's been listed in MLS and LoopNet, in Property Shark, and in CoStar, that's the second column I'm reading from. Switching to the fourth column, I'll just go to letters to the citywide organizations. We've spent an aggressive amount of time in a year, three specific occasions, sending 3 specific letters to all 14 of those local letters to citywide organizations, which you see listed there, and I'm not going to read them, but you can see there that we've reached out to all of them. And then on the right side, you can see the chronology of the rents that we've asked for the space, starting in June 2013 at a high of $150 a square foot, which dropped, and then in 2015, in the fall of 2015, after meeting with city planning and with Councilwoman Chin, as well as with the borough president and the community board, and then we marketed at about that rate ever since. We did go before Community Board 2 a few weeks ago. They unanimously supported the application. We've met with the borough president, who also supported the application, with the proviso that we try and find an arts-based tenant if we can, which we're going to make an effort to. So that's our presentation. Thank you.
Questions for Mr. Palatnik? Yes, Vice Chair Nichols.
Well, the parent number at the end, which will eventually be negotiated to $50 per square foot.
I'm gonna, if it's okay with you, Brandon Charnas is here to speak. He's one of the next speakers. He's with Cushman and Wakefield, and he'll explain the negotiation that he expects that occurs. So,
thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Oh, yes, Commissioner Levin.
Well, Mr. Palatnik, as you're certainly aware, having lived through this good faith marketing process, there are a lot of us who feel that this is a creaky system that has outlived its time. What's your recommendation
I was hoping you were going to ask that.
For reform?
I was hoping you were going to ask something like that, because it's this, if I could just spend a couple of seconds to explain to you, this has been ongoing since 2013. And in that time, the value of this space has dropped in half. And I wasn't joking when I said hopefully we get a tenant. Pretty much just because of what the testimony you're just hearing. So you're seeing the Amazon effect ripple right through everything. I think there has to be a way to make it so that the process is quicker, so that they can still have the marketing efforts would be fine. The online efforts, the clear guidelines that have come out within the past year, the city planning has been giving, the department has been giving quite clear guidance. I think that's what was needed. I think up until that moment in time, everybody was just ad hoc selecting what publications they were going to, what the asking price that they were going to ask for, and it was always up to a lot of debate over where to go. But if you're still looking to keep a control over what comes into Soho and the uses that are there, so if the special permit still makes sense to you conceptually, I think that what's gone on since 2015, the fall of 2015, is when we really got to kick in earnest. And I think if it worked like that, moving forward, I think you'd find things would move a lot quicker.
Even so, I don't believe we've ever had a case where the end of the marketing effort is that someone has found a tenant with a
well, that's a whole other question. Yes, it is sort of, we joke, and you'll hear from Brendan Charnas, who's the second who's going to speak. He's actually very involved in real estate in Soho, and he'll speak to you and tell you that there is no demand for any of the manufacturing space for which we are asking. I mean,
try to trick you.
You can't speak yet. He's going to tell, what he's going to tell you, as he just said, is they try to trick you. Everybody will call up and say, oh, I have an eyeglass, he'll use the example, an eyeglass manufacturing company, and we want to make eyeglasses, and by the time you're done with the conversation, you find out that they want to sell eyeglasses, and maybe if they have to, they'll put somebody in the basement with a screwdriver for a second to make it look like they're manufacturing them. But there really is the demand for this building, for example, to give you the lunacy of this, if I can speak honestly, it has no loading berth. It has no access from the street. There's no frontage on it. There's no way for people to get in and out down to the cellar level easily. So if you were going to open up your widget company, I don't think this would be the location that you would be jumping to, and that's what Brendan is really going to tell you, the same experience.
Yeah, I don't think the advocates are talking about widgets, but,
right, but
we'll continue it later.
Same concept, but thank you for bringing up the discussion.
Other questions for Mr. Palatnik? Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker in support is Michael Nickmias.
I believe Michael's going to pass.
Okay. Then our next speaker is the heralded, awaited Brandon Charnas.
Yeah, we've been waiting quite some time for this project. Started back in 2013. Eddie of Zongjin Apparel called me and told me that there was a task at hand, and I had to find a manufacturing tenant for the space and use, a good faith marketing program in order to do it. So, we started in June of 2013. I hired first Corcoran Group, a guy by the name of David Graff. I hired Compass, and then it's actually Brandon Singer, who's at Cushman & Wakefield. I'm Brandon Charnas. And then we hired Culm Indulgent. As Eric stated, we reached out to citywide and local advertisements. We did weekly advertisements in the New York Times, the Village Voice, Chelsea Now, Downtown Express, East Villager, The Villager, Gay City, Manhattan Express. We then had conversations with Culm Indulgent. We put the property, they were the expert in this field to find a manufacturing tenant. Coleman Dolgen listed us on their website. We then used MLS. I used LinkedIn. I used LoopNet, Property Shark, and then I also used CoStar. So it started out when we were marketing at about $150 a foot. Wasn't getting a ton of calls at $150 a foot. People were calling, but it was kind of, the same story. They really just were, when I asked them, who's the tenant? What do you guys do? And they say, well, we make, to bring up what Eric referred to, is they said, we make eyeglasses. I said, okay, so just so we're clear, you're planning on manufacturing the eyeglasses out of this location on Mercer Street, to be clear, next to Vince and Helmut Lang and, across from Zara, you're going to be making your eyeglasses. And they said yes. And, we went down the road with an offer from them. And then, I was shocked. They were at ask, $150 a foot. They were hitting the number. I thought, this is incredible. And then, as we kept going down the road, I said, do you have a lawyer to negotiate the term sheet? And there was no lawyer, and it was just a total, ring around to try and figure out a way for them to sell their eyeglasses out of the location. And it took a lot of my time, wasted a lot of all of our time, especially at a time when, retail was really in a great place at that time. That was 2013. When we met with city planning, and we had reached out, it was actually in connection with a few of the agencies that we sent letters to, like the Soho Broadway Initiative, the NoHo Business Improvement District, which at this point now I've become so close with these people that they may, I may be going on the board with them now. So, I mean, it's either that or it's a lobbying firm. I don't know. So we reached out to these various agencies and asked for their assistance. We spoke to the borough president's office. We spoke to city planning, and they suggested we lower the rent. So we lowered the rent, and I got more calls, actually. There was some more calls, but it was just to find, so can we do retail there? I'm like, does anyone read what we're putting in these publications? It specifically says for manufacturing use. We got some calls, and still nothing really came through, with people traditionally wanting to rent it for the $70 a foot that we ended up going with. No one really was going to manufacture their widgets, like Eric said, out of there and really rent the space at $70 a foot. Our plan, to talk about what was referenced earlier, is at the end of the day, we figured we ask $70 a foot, and you end up getting $50 at the end of the day. So
I'm afraid we're going to have to cut you off, and you actually got some extra minutes because the secretary forgot to start the clock.
Anyway,
questions from the commission. Vice Chair Nichols.
Is there anything you wanted to add in a sentence or two?
Just happy to finally be here.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner DeLuz.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for explaining the long, arduous process that you've been going through. And the fact that there really has been good faith marketing efforts. I'm wondering if you could speak to the community board's recommendation for the artisanal kind of use, and whether or not, in your experience over the last couple of years, you've seen demand for that. If not, then what would you do to try to, meet that request?
I think it's really what we could do is try and ask the tenant that's taking the space, and to be honest, there are not that many tenants out there these days. It's just the truth. If we do find a tenant and we ask them if they could potentially use the space, donate it, give it back to the arts for a couple days a week, we'll pay for it. We'll subsidize maybe their rent. If they can allow, community board meeting to be held there, or some kind of something to give back to the community and for the arts. I don't know if we can do something with the space. There's a lot of space. There's space on the
ground floor, that typically the reason for the whole, to go through this whole change of use is to typically get a higher rent from the ground floor, from the basement, to be able to rent it, right? Nowadays, there's no more, you can't say, oh, you're selling spaces downstairs and, you got to pay $100 a foot for the downstairs. People are just looking at the gross rent on the ground floor. So we'd have to say to them, hey, we're throwing in the basement as part of this whole thing. Maybe there's a way you guys can just use this to give back to the arts for, 1, 2, 3 days a year. I think that's the only real way to ensure that requirement is met. But the truth is, it's tough, when you're talking to a retailer who's paying that kind of rent in Manhattan. It's tough to ask them to do that. But of course, we can try and, with the tenants that are looking, we've been at this since 2013. I'm happy to try and find the right tenant for the space. It's been more of a, unlike Eric, I don't get paid for my time. So, so it's really more of an emotional thing for me at this point. I hope it's a great tenant that takes the space, so.
Commissioner Ortiz.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
You seem to have a penchant for brokers named Brandon. I will say that there. We actually just came from a hearing. We were talking about experiential retail, and I think this is a bigger question that has come up a few times. Increasingly we are seeing retailers waking up to the fact that they have to offer experiences, and that ends up resulting in really interesting kinds of uses. So in the Nike store in Soho, they're making sneakers on the ground floor of the Nike store. I've worked in communities where we have an ice cream store, and they're making small batches of ice cream in the back and selling them wholesale to local restaurants. Downtown breweries, they're making beer on site, coffee roasters. Increasingly we're having this, and one of the things I think that's challenging with the zoning code is that it doesn't necessarily recognize these mixed manufacturing uses that we are needing to embrace, because that's the direction which retail is going. Mm-hmm. So it's not strange to hear that, you might in fact have a eyeglass manufacturer that's doing really high-end, small batch, eyeglass making in the back potentially.
As an ancillary use, yep.
Yeah, and wanting a retail veneer in a place like Soho to sell. And so I raised that question, when does something meet the manufacturing requirements, but when do we allow them to have a retail veneer? Because that is increasingly what we're seeing wants to be in those spaces. And it's an open question for me. I think I talked to Ryan at one point about that, because we saw it at Spofford. And is that something to explore and think about, how we define what is considered manufacturing, so that we can support those kinds of uses here?
It's a great point.
That could be a good discussion when it comes back to review session.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you can separate the retail, right, and the manufacturing, and have them pay the manufacturing rents for the manufacturing space and the retail rents for the retail space, then maybe that could be an idea. But it's tough, obviously, to rent it at a manufacturing rental rate at a retail rental rate for.
Yeah, you could look at a blended rate
number
for them, because they're going to want to know what the rent is per square foot.
Yep.
Ultimately. So.
Yep.
Commissioner Levin.
Yeah, well, I just have a comment that goes to a broader conversation, and it even goes beyond a follow-up discussion here. You're talking as if the whole point here is to facilitate retail. That's not what the zoning text is for. It was created in the 1970s to preserve manufacturing use that was actually in those buildings at that time. The economy has changed, the neighborhood has changed, the zoning text clings to the notion that we should be protecting this space for manufacturers. It's not about creating entertainment use or viable retail. It's about being sure that there's no manufacturer out there who could use this space, because those manufacturers were essential to the historic character, preserving the historic character of the Soho neighborhood. Maybe that world has changed, we have to have a bigger conversation about that issue. But let's not forget, this text is not about facilitating retail.
And one thing I would note is, to quote Gail Brewer and her expose on shuttered storefronts, it's something to review and take into account. I mean, in a larger discussion, you should both sides of the coin.
Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
And and to add to that, manufacturing is changing too. And so the kinds of manufacturing we're seeing where we can create value, we are seeing this weird mix of retail and manufacturing. So I do think it's a complicated thing to unpack.
Right, and that's why the community board and the borough president are pushing property owners like this toward artisanal kinds of uses that might have that dual component, but it would be lean very heavily on the manufacturing side of things.
Yeah, with one of the key words that was used being ancillary. And I think the discussion or the issue that this raises is tail dog.
Exactly.
Well, thank you for your testimony, which took us off in a more philosophical direction. Our next speaker in support is Chris Carano.
Yeah, my name is Chris Carano. I'm the architect for the project, and I'm really just here to answer any questions.
Questions from the commission?
I do
Thank you.
support it. Thank you.
So those are the only speakers who have signed up on this item, but if anyone else wanted to be heard, now's the time. Okay, so the public hearing is closed.
Okay. Borough of Manhattan, calendar number 11, CD2, C180170, ZMM, a public hearing in the matter of an application for zoning map amendment concerning 180 through 188 Avenue of the Americas.
Richard LaBelle, Sheldon LaBelle, PC for the applicant. As the commissioners have commented, I'm bookending the hearing here. It's an honor. So what we're presenting today is a rezoning with regards to 180 Avenue of the Americas. There was some discussion of whether I was going to get the 10 minutes. I've got Huntley Gill here, who is the project architect and is the owner's representative.
I'll note that you have 3 minutes, and then Mr. Gill separately has 3 minutes.
Fantastic. So essentially, this is a very straightforward rezoning. The applicant owns this property on 180 Avenue of the Americas. The rezoning of the property is R72C15. For a number of years, dating back to 2013, 2014, they were attempting to market the premises for retail, use group 6 retail, and the only interest that was provided was from a PCE, a gym, as well as a dance studio. So as you can see from the zoning, the zoning right now is a C15 overlay, and the rezoning would merely be to rezone this property as well as portions of other properties to a C25 overlay. And what that would do would be to facilitate two things. One would be to allow this use group 9 dance studio, which incidentally exists across the street, across 6th Avenue, has a robust clientele from the area, and is within this currently within the M16 district. They would be moving across the street. And the second would be to allow for the operation of a PCE use, which is only permitted by special permit of BSA, but is not permitted in C1 districts and is only permitted in C2 districts. So again, the property is included in the rezoning, as well as 2 properties on Spring Street. The rezoning would also, if you look at the rear of the property along Sullivan Street, those properties that are included, the zoning district boundary would be fixed. There's currently a split lot condition where those properties are included in the commercial overlay, but they are all residential buildings. So this is a corrective action as well. We included those properties to move the district boundary to a fixed distance from Sullivan, so that we would eliminate the split lot condition. So again, the land use here is heavily commercial. This does represent somewhat of a dead spot on 6th Avenue. God's Love We Deliver is immediately to the south of the site. It is not a retail presence. It is a robust facility to cater to many who are do not have food, and so there's a lot of food production that occurs there. And so we're hopeful that the commission will grant this rezoning in order to allow productive use of what is currently now unproductive and in certain instances vacant property.
Thank you.
Sure.
Questions for Mr. Lobel? Yes, Commissioner Levin.
Yes, Mr. LaBelle, as I understand it, at least from our briefing materials, the portion of the commercial space has been occupied by a gym called Switch.
Correct.
Since August of 2017.
Correct.
And as you acknowledge, that's not a legal use for this
Correct.
building?
Correct.
How did they come to occupy the space?
So I'm going to let Mr. Gill address that in his remarks. I will tell you that there was an effort that Switch made to open as accessory to the building. I know that there were a certain number of, there's about 25 units, residential units in the building. Many of those residential unit owners received membership to Switch, but it appears now that they're operating in violation and that they're operating a PC in violation of permitted use. I will note that being a practitioner before BSA and having done a number of many PCE cases, you'd be surprised, but a majority of those PCE cases actually are done at BSA as legalizations. So well over 50%. For some reason, it's kind of the way that these work is that many of these institutions need operating capital, so they open and then they come. BSA actually has a checklist of items that are required for legalization of a PCE. So this is kind of an open secret, so to speak. But in this case, no, there's no artifice. I mean, they did open. It is a violation of the PC regulations. And as far as the owner is concerned, and Mr. Gill can address this, they have, I believe, been put in default of the lease due to that activity. So this is not something that has been condoned by the owner, but it is something which is they're engaging in.
Okay, well, maybe after we finish fixing the good faith marketing text in Soho, we can take on the need to get a special permit for a perfectly normal gym.
Sure.
I'll actually note that as we're looking at the initiatives under the mayor's New York Works Plan at impediments that may exist in the zoning resolution, this issue of the PCE special permit is one that is on our list. Yes, Commissioner Ortiz.
I would just reinforce that because I think, as we've heard now numerous times today, today's the day to get philosophical about retail. But, we've got these kinds of uses that are filling, what we traditionally think of as retail spaces, but that's where they want to go now. And this physique, which I've actually been to, is located on upper floor. And the internal to the building. And so to bring it down to the street, I think is a very interesting concept, and that's what we're going to begin seeing more of. So I think we want to encourage, or at least make it easier for operators to do something reasonable with their spaces.
Yes, Commissioner Efron.
And if anyone really enjoys watching the back of anchors' heads, they certainly probably much more enjoy watching people bumping up and down on exercise bikes.
I make no comment on that.
Probably best not. Okay, thank you, Mr. Lobel. Our next speaker in support is Huntley Gill.
I really have nothing to add, but I'm here in case you have questions.
Questions from the commission?
Yes.
Thank you. And I am required to note that anyone else is welcome to testify, except that I believe the room is empty, other than city planning folks. And so with that, the public hearing is closed. And Madam Secretary, any other business before us?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, the public meeting is over. Thank you.
And it is